Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the Program and Personnel Committee meeting for District 128 for Monday, April 11th, 2020 to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Flags gently.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. First on the agenda is invitation for public comment. Do we have anyone in person that would like to make any comments to the Program and Personnel Committee? No? We have any?
I do.
Email?
I
Okay,
have one.
okay, thank you.
And this letter is from Marjorie Mailing. Dear school board members, I wanted to let you know how much I, as a parent, appreciate the extraordinary time and effort that you have all put in over the last 2 years during the COVID situation. To say that the conversations were not easy would be an understatement, but discussion is critical to improvement and forward momentum. I simply wanted to let you know that you are appreciated, your time, your efforts, and your opinions, whatever side that you may have been on. Your commitment is exemplary, and we are lucky to have such passionate, dedicated members on our school board. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mary. Next on the agenda, COVID-19 metrics and testing update. Brian, can you-
Sure. Just again, our metrics are always updated online on the district website. So you can go onto the district website and see, again, it'll show our data from our students and staff at Libertyville and Vernon Hills High School. And according to the CDC, we're still in low transmission in our county. As far as testing, we are still testing through shield testing our unvaccinated staff weekly. And that's our update.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comments from the board on that? Nope. Okay, review of the March committee summary. Anyone have any updates or corrections to that? Okay, hearing none. We'll move on. We have looking forward to a presentation on board policy 712, that's racial equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Turn it over to the two principals who have been taking a yeoman share of the leadership in our district equity leadership team. And our equity coordinators are also going to be sharing in the presentation.
We have to stand at this desk here. This is going to be the challenge, but this does move, so I can move it around. Thank you very much, members of the Board of Education, for having us here this evening. We are very excited as members of our district equity leadership team to provide you a glimpse into the work we've been doing around equity in District 128 and to share with you some of the updates about the commitments we make through our equity policy. So just to give you a very quick overview of the work of our district, you know that equity is firmly embedded in our daring mission. It is fundamental to what we do. And though it's reflected in all of our attributes, it's very clear when we work with our students to help them become aware. We have the goals of them becoming aware of what they love in their pursuits, but also reflecting frequently on who they are and who they are working to become. And then not just thinking about themselves and who they are, but being conscious of those members of our school community who come to this place, Vernon Hills or Libertyville, every day, and understanding and thinking about the varied realities that other members of our community have. We think about being inquisitive and curious about the world's complicated past, present, and future, as well as pondering problems, questioning some of the convention of our society, and proposing solutions to situations that continue to vex us. And then, of course, we emphasize being global in that we value diversity and we believe diversity is an asset to our community and that we seek to build relationships with others in order to maximize the value and the assets that we have within our community. So while those are fundamental to what we do, you as a board pushed us to go further and to make sure that our daring mission applies to every single student when we talk about our school community. We also think about equity, not just in terms of daring, but in terms of access. So every child in our system deserves to have access to all of the programs and facets that our school were to offer. We think of equity in terms of outcomes, in that we want to have high levels of learning for all of our students in our system. And we know that this has to be more than words and phrases. This has to be our actions, and we have to walk our talk. And so you and we agree to have systemic accountability around this, in that we reflect frequently on the progress we are making, the areas of our success, and our areas for continued growth. And so while that daring mission is our foundation of equity, we knew that in our board policies, we had many different examples where we were ensuring gender equity, or where we were working to protect and preserve things like equity for students with learning disabilities and IEPs and 504s. There were different provisions within our policy to look at different aspects of a child's identity and to ensure that those things were protected. Last year, if you recall, you as a board went a step further and made sure that racial equity and inclusion was not just a fundamental idea that was embedded in our mission, but was also something that was fundamentally protected and stated in our official board policies. And that is 7112, the racial equity, diversity, and inclusion policy. Now, what I do want to remind you tonight, when we present out on equity, as schools, we are working on equity in the broadest sense of the word. So we are focused on gender equity. We are focused on income equity, on students' languages and religions. Obviously, our goal is that every single member of our community, our students, our staff, our parents, our community members, are able to come to our buildings and they are able to thrive in our environments. And so we do focus on the broad sense of equity. Tonight, however, we're going to report out just on our efforts around racial equity and inclusion. Okay, so that's not to say those other things aren't important, but it's to say that tonight we, as part of our policy, that would be our focus. And so what you're going to hear tonight is you're going to hear about the different commitments that we as a school community make in the area of racial diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're going to hear some about the work that has been done in 4 of those commitments, the research, the data that we used, and you're going to hear about some of the implications that we as a professional staff believe that this work leads us to as a district. Okay, and so to take us into that, and to kind of give you the overview of how this work was conducted this year, introduce you to my colleague, John Gilliam.
Thank you, Tom. So I want to talk a little bit about the District Equity Leadership Team, its process, and you see there a list of who's who. It's a pretty impressive list. In August of this year, Dr. Herman made a plea to staff to get involved with one of the significant daring initiatives happening across our district. So hundreds of individuals signed up for innovation teams that focused on flexible use of time, equitable grading, strategic planning, which I know a few of you have been a part of. And in this case, our equity policy, this district equity leadership team. We were fortunate to have over 50 staff members volunteer for this important work. And that's an encouraging sign, as many of these individuals were already doing important work on the school-wide leadership teams. It demonstrates the importance of the adopted policy, the value that this work brings to our organization, and the commitment by so many to see it through. We began meeting in the fall and quickly started work towards really 3 initial tasks. 1, to review and understand the policy and what it asks of us. To understand the 14 commitments as they relate to schoolwork, district work, and community work. and to prioritize the commitments into those that are most available and important for us as we decided to work this year as a team. After a few meetings of dialogue, prioritization, and even some voting, we selected our 4 components. And here are the 4. I won't read them all, but the first focuses on creating an identity and affirming environment for all stakeholders. Commitment 2 focuses on recruiting, hiring, and retaining. Commitment 3 takes a multifaceted look at strengths and assets of students, comprehensive student growth, and pathways to success. And commitment 6 ensures that student access to diverse, inclusive, and multiracial and cultural curriculum. Remember, all 14 commitments are important and valued. Summaries of the data and work in the remaining commitments will be presented to the board over the next months and as the 2021-22 school year comes to a conclusion. So once we decided on the 4 working commitments, we just assigned leadership and began the work. Thanks, Dan. I have to give credit where credit is due here to Tiffany Scott, who was actually part of our leadership team. She early on introduced and recommended a framework for each team to be able to use to organize and systematize their work. And this process in front of you is the framework we chose. Step 1 is what we see and what we have. So that's analyzing the commitments and looking at data. Step 2 was what is research saying? What do we need? Identify current best practices and impacts on the system. Step 3 was to take a look at actions, what we do and what we do that needs to be refined. And then finally, step 4 is what do we say? Analyzing the data and ultimately presenting to you tonight here to the Board of Education. Members of each of the 4 sub-teams will present their work, including data that was collected and analyzed, highlights of research that was studied, and several implications for now and into the future. So we start tonight with commitment 1, and I'll turn it back over to Tom and Amy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Christian. I am currently one of the English teachers and equity coordinators at Vernon Hills High School. And I had the pleasure and honor to work alongside Tom to co-steer this subgroup. And we worked with an amazing team. And so while you're hearing our voices right now, we want you to know that it is not the work of just our voices alone, but a powerful team of volunteers from both buildings who came together to really dig into commitment number 1. So commitment number 1, as John mentioned, is all about ensuring that our schools are identity affirming environments where every student who walks in, every family that comes in, and the community itself feels safe, feels welcomed, and feels valued. So we started off with a few different data points of the metrics that the policy stated that we would look into, and that was the prescribed metrics of the Panorama Equity and Inclusion Survey, as well as the 5 Essentials surveys. Those 2 surveys gave us a lot of data about our students and are they feeling belonging? Are they feeling safety? Are they feeling valued? I mean, you can look in the full reports to see how all of those data points are analyzed, but the few that we wanted to shout out right now relates to the students' sense of belonging and support at school, their sense of safety, and their sense of visibility in school and curriculum. And these are some of the top data points that really spoke loudly to our group. We want you to, thanks, Tom.
Those surveys give us a wealth of data about our school community. And what our committee did was we not only read through the entire surveys, but as Amy mentioned, because we were focused on identity affirming environments, we laser focused in on the questions that were designed to provide us with information about that feature of our school community. And so as Amy mentioned here, when we talk about a sense of belongingness and support at school, it's how do students feel? Do they feel they belong, that this school is a place for them, that recognizes them, and that supports their presence? The student's sense of safety is not just physical safety, but emotional safety. And do I feel like I'm going to be teased or bullied or harassed? Are there places in the building where I can go, where I feel safe? And then obviously, beyond some of the emotional, we connected with students around the idea of, do they see themselves formally represented in our school curriculum, in the classes they take, or do they see themselves represented in the life of the school through our extracurricular programs and different offerings and events that we do as a school community? Do you want me to just highlight some of the top findings
Sure.
on that? So just to highlight for both schools, while the vast majority of our students did report feeling that they belonged at our school, we did find that 32% of our students reported that their family has a sense of limited belonging in our community, and that our students of color were reporting feeling a lower level of belonging at school than our white students were. So we saw a little bit of a gap between that sense of belonging. While students of color still reported an overall sense of belonging in our environment, it wasn't as strong as what our white students were reporting. For all of our schools, Vernon Hills and Libertyville, the highest area that students rated of why they feel they belong was because of student and teacher trust. It was the relationships between students and teachers that kids told us mattered the most for making them feel that they belong here. And that was very high for all students across the board. In terms of sense of safety, this is very important for you as a board to recognize is while the vast majority of our kids did report feeling safe in our schools, 638 students across both schools said that they witnessed racism in our schools sometimes to almost always. So the kids are walking our halls, they're going through our buildings, and over the course of their year, they're seeing things that in their minds are racist and that make them uncomfortable and that are not okay. 291 of our students, about half the number that witnessed it, 291 said they experience it. They actually experience racism sometimes to almost always. So sometimes was like a lower level, and then almost always was the highest. And so within that range, there were 291 students telling us not only do they witness it, but that they actually experience it. Now, what was a bit of a surprise to me, I'll only speak for myself, our African-American students who identify as Black, while they reported lower levels of feeling safe than our white students did, they weren't the lowest. The lowest level of safety that was reported at both Vernon Hills and Libertyville was by our Asian students. And so our Asian students were telling us when we come to Libertyville High School, we feel sometimes nervous. We feel worried that we may be at harm or at risk of being bullied or harassed. And so that indicator was consistent at both schools, and something that our committee, seeing that data, we know that moving forward, we've really got to dig into that and understand what that is and where these types of things are happening so that we can work to provide an even broader sense of safety to our students. Would you like to talk about the visibility piece?
Sure. So when it comes to our students finding themselves in the school curriculum, finding themselves in the texts that are in front of them and the lessons that come in front of them, we know that that has an impact on their sense of belonging. 71% of our white students report that they often see themselves represented in the curriculum. So it's wonderful that well over half of our students are seeing both, the windows that we hope for them to see and look outside, but also mirrors to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. We want you to know, though, that less than 51% of our students of color report seeing themselves in the curriculum often. So while they are seeing windows of other identities, they are not seeing themselves as mirrors as frequently as our white students. What also came through in the Panorama survey, especially, is that there are students who are expressing a desire to learn about diverse identities and of each other's identities, and they want to be included in the equity and diversity and inclusion experiences. That came through pretty loud and clear through the free responses through the Panorama data, and you can see in the report some of those specific answers that are coming through there. And that was not just expressed by our students of color, but many of our white students are also expressing desires to be a part of this work and perhaps to look, what does it look like to work in alliance with other students too. You should know that that data all comes from this past fall.
Yeah. And what I think is important for you as a board to understand, especially perhaps when you're out in the community and things, is it was very much a very strong sentiment from our students that equity discussions of diversity and inclusion are very important to the students. And they believe they were asking us for more opportunity to engage in discussions about it because many of them who see the racism, they report believing that it's through discussions and education and communication with their peers that they can reduce those incidents. So our kids are seeing it. They know it's not acceptable. They know it's not right. They want to do something about it. And they're looking to the adults in our system to create opportunities for them to come together with their peers and talk about these things as a way to educate one another and stand in support of one another.
Something that's not included here because it was not a part of the prescribed metrics for measuring the policy and its effect. We do want you to look into the report. There's an audit of the programming that is happening in the two buildings related to diversity, inequity, and inclusion. That's looking at our extracurricular clubs, the groups that are formed through our LSTs. We've audited all the different identities that are showing up in our system and what sorts of programs are available for them. And we're excited to announce that there is a lot of programming available for many of our students' identities, and we're excited to keep increasing that programming. A data point that you don't notice up there is data from the parents. And part of C1 is about making sure that families do feel they are part of an identity affirming environment, but we don't get any data from the parents in the Panorama survey. It's only for students and for staff. And our response rate for the 5 Essentials survey from parents, we think is too low for us to look at that as a specific metric. So we need to find more ways to get the data from the parents long-term. The strategic planning survey is one of those places where we saw parents kind of calling out for more ways to communicate with schools. So there's some things that we can do going forward. That actually relates to our research points. These research points are really, really slim right here. So we hope that at some point, maybe you dive into the report and then click on the annotated bibliography that our amazing counterparts worked and put together of all the research that's out there. There's a lot out there for what can we do to increase our students' sense of belonging. And one of them, the first one actually has to do with family. So culturally responsive family engagement leads to higher student success. So we really need to drill into what can we do to engage families and the community, especially of our culturally and linguistically diverse students, in order to make sure they're engaged and feel belonging, because that will also increase their students' sense of belonging. Another one of our top research points is that identity safe environments promote a growth mindset, which is something we really truly believe in D128, and it allows students to feel accepted and included. So we need to do whatever we can to ensure that we are providing identity safe environments for our students. Finally, the third top research point that came through is that both formal and informal identity affirming spaces are necessary for the well-being and growth of all students. This is a little bit surprising to me. I've done a lot of work for formal spaces to create affinity spaces for our students on our campuses, but we're also learning that informal places that just kind of pop up, the research supports that those are really important for students. When something happens and arises, we need to provide that space.
And I think what's really important, again, along these lines is not only did the research we look at talk about a student's sense of emotional safety and a sense of belongingness as a community, but this work is so important to us because it's all linked to higher student achievement outcomes as well. So absent a supportive, caring community, an adolescent learner doesn't achieve at their full potential. With adults, that as an adult learner, you don't necessarily have to be quite as connected to your community to still learn and grow and get what you need out of a formal education. But with adolescents, with teenagers especially, that is critical. And it is through the social emotional, the sense of belonging, it is through the emotional level that our children learn. And so this is work that we do not just to create a better feeling environment for everybody, but to create higher outcomes as well for our learners.
So with this data and the research in mind, we have a few recommendations for our system. The first set have to do with increasing parent and community engagement, and the second set for increasing student belonging. The data and research suggests when it comes to our families and our community belonging that we need to create spaces for culturally and linguistically diverse parents and community members to be collaborating, connecting with one another. That sometimes looks like family caucuses. In some schools, that is like what a BPAC, the Bilingual Parent Association, those sorts of councils look like. So we need to provide space for that. We need to be bridging between the feeder schools, the foundational schools and the high schools. And we need to foster the opportunity for parents to partner with the schools themselves so that way they can feel engaged and a part of those decisions. We need to improve our practices and our understanding around culturally responsive communication with families. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. The email communications and phone calls that my parents got when I went to Libertyville High School are not the best communication for all families. families. And so we need to learn how to communicate better with all families. So that includes bidirectional and face-to-face communication when appropriate, multimodal communication when appropriate, creating inclusive meeting times and spaces so that parents who are working late shifts are able to be included in those meetings as well. And information presented in language that families understand and relate to. So both in their home language and that's not written like we talk to each other necessarily, but the way that families talk about education with their kids. And finally, we did make all decisions that impact parents and families in concert with parents and families. And we do this in a lot of ways in our district, right? But doing it with an intentional mindset and bringing in the culturally and linguistically diverse families is something that we know that we need to continue improving on to enable all families to be empowered and informed advocates for their children. Would you like to talk about the student belonging?
Yeah, for students, it's similar. This idea of providing formal through teacher-led or staff-led experiences for kids, but also informal opportunities for students in Affinity to gather as well as, so it's important for us to bring kids together who share an identity, for them to learn from one another, for them to grow and give support to one another. But we also hear very clearly and understand the need to bring kids together in multi-identity groups so that they learn to be allies for one another. And kids are asking for that, and our research is suggesting that we continue to develop those opportunities. Also, as the students told us, the number one reason they feel connected and belonging is through teacher to student relationships. We want to continue to prioritize staff connections with every single student. And while we have nurtured that and developed that and pushed that in informal ways, we think there's areas in 128 for us to develop formal mentoring opportunities or advisory opportunities that really go further in ensuring all students have connections with adults in our building. And then obviously when kids enter our learning spaces, when they enter our classrooms, we're spending a lot of time with staff talking about what does it mean to have an identity affirming environment for all learners in all identities. We did a series of departmental workshops this year that were geared on kind of looking at the way we construct our classrooms and our formal learning spaces to be inclusive of all learners. And I think for us, that is a tour de force overview of our research, our data, and our implications. And with that, we're going to turn it back to John and I think Bryant for C2, or just John? Just John.
Just me, Bryant. Bryant left me alone. Okay, C2. Bryant and I actually did lead this commitment. Dan was in our team, as well as I think in your report you see approximately 5 other wonderful D128 staff members. C2 concentrates on recruiting, hiring, and retaining practices that embrace a diverse staffing at all personnel and every level that reflects the global community and staff who carry out the district's commitment to equity and diversity. Commitment 2. Like commitment 1, we spent time looking at data and research that helped to drive our implications and our work both now and in the future. So I want to talk a little bit about that. First of all, the data. I've been working with kids for many years who have said things like, Dr. G, what we want is to have more teachers who look like us. And this idea of developing a diverse teaching staff, especially as it relates to the data that they just told us, that relationships are the key, or at least a significant key in student achievement. And to hear students on top of that say that teachers who come from diverse backgrounds relate to and connect with students who come from diverse backgrounds makes this a really important commitment for us, and one that we've been working on for actually quite some time. Those first 2 bullets there in D128, staff of color has increased in percentage 6.3% in 2018-19 to 9.2% in 21-22. At Libertyville from 5.3 to 6.8%, and at Vernon Hills from 7.9 to 12.1%. Like I said, it's been a commitment that we've had for quite some time, and we are really eager to continue that good work. That, of course, in that first bullet, 6.3 to 9.2 relates to just about 3% of an increase over 4 years. That translates from 28 staff of color to 44 staff of color. I don't know if what those numbers sound like to you, but when you're talking about roughly 450 staff members to go from 28 to 44 is a significant change. And we, like I said, are really encouraged to increase that. Most notably, both our Black or African American and Hispanic staff have doubled in employee counts in those 4 years. That next bullet, we've used Frontline and AppleTrack to determine where our applicants get information about our postings. Applicants are not required to self-report, which is one of the things that we found particularly kind of challenging as we look at Frontline and AppleTrack. We're not getting exactly the data that we're committed to reporting to you in these metrics, but 19% have chosen not to report their racial background. 33% of applicants list district or school, indicating that applicants visit our school website in order to find out about positions. And I think that's indicative of a high quality school district. School employees or individuals are looking to work at our school. And so they're searching us out through our own websites. 18.1% of applicants have used commercial job boards, including sites like Lake County Regional Office of Education, K-12 Job Spot, so on and so forth. 18.8% of our applicants list word of mouth, which is indicative of the value of our own professional and personal networks. And then finally, 10% of applicants found us through job fairs, including both virtually, especially here as we've had to kind of suffer through this pandemic, and in-person job fairs. From the 1819 to present, D128 applicants for opening positions break down by race as such. 73.9% of applicants are white, where 68.3% of our students are white. 9.4% of applicants are Hispanic, where 11.5% of our students are Hispanic. 1.6% of applicants are Black, where 1.9% of our students are Black. And 3.9% of our applicants are Asian, where 15.2% of our students are Asian, just to give you a little insight there. When we look at some of the highlights of the research that we looked at, and again, the comprehensive report will give you far more research studies and articles than what I'm going to read to you first. But the first one is that the data suggests that our country's schools are increasingly diverse, right? 50% of students of color and growing. Meanwhile, only 18% of teachers are teachers of color. And that gap is widening. Point two there, data indicates that the closing of the gap is not encouraging. There's good news to start, and that is such that teachers of color are finding jobs. There's no data to suggest that because of discrimination or other, teachers of color are not being hired. On the contrary, schools are recruiting a very limited pool, one that is not growing as fast as teacher need. The teacher pipeline, especially teachers of color, happens to be declining. The third research point there is data suggests that teachers and staff of color are attracted to and want to work in schools that are racially diverse, especially at the teacher and administrator level. That's why it's so important for us to continue this good work. And finally, schools are more likely to retain high quality staff of color if they feel a sense of belonging. D128 is their home, a sense of value. Do we understand their perspective and are we willing to act on it? And feel a sense of support. Do we have systems in place to encourage, to develop, and to further their professional aspirations? Thanks, Dan. So that leads us to just a few implications and actions. First, relative to recruiting and hiring, we need to continue to increase our presence at job fairs and at posting sites. I listed some of those fairs and sites we've used in the past. As COVID releases its grip, we will recommit to finding local and statewide job fairs that can get us access to diverse candidate pool. Just as importantly, like I said, in our research section, teachers of color are drawn to a school where they see themselves. It's important for us to send administrators of colors to these fairs so that we can attract a diverse candidate pool. Next, we want to address the teacher pipeline at a local level. This, of course, is far more difficult for us as a high school, but we believe that we can and will do some good work here. We are moving at both schools to start a Future Teacher of America club at each high school. We always attract our own D128 graduates who want to teach back in our school. So if we can encourage our own students, especially high quality students of color, to pursue teaching jobs, we can have a good chance at luring them back into our hallways as teachers. We also are looking toward relationships with local colleges and universities that may yield a diverse pool of student teachers and ultimately staff hires. We have already taken steps to change our interview protocols and to better track applicants and hires. Again, as I said, while Frontline keeps some good information and tracks some of the data that we have committed to reporting to you, we realize it does have its limitations. So in order to present you with all the specific metrics we've been asked to, we've implemented a system change that has administrators responsible for hiring, reporting data as they move along the recruiting, interviewing, and hiring process. And finally, we want to hire administrators of color. We are committed to that, and we've already begun that good work here in the district. As we look at retaining staff of color, just a few things. First, we want to implement a feedback loop for our staff of color. The good news is we've already started that process. This week, actually Wednesday, Dr. Herman will be hosting a roundtable with our staff of color to hear a little bit more and understand better their experiences, their perspectives, and their beliefs about District 128 and specifically working there. Dr. K and I will be hosting another focus group that looks more specifically at the recruiting, the hiring, and the retaining process as we look to better understand what it is that we're doing well and what it is that we can improve as we try to look to support our staff of color. We want to strengthen our staff of color affinity group. As you've heard, we have all sorts of different student affinity groups, and some of these groups we'll be talking a little bit more about those, I think. But we also have a staff of color affinity group, new, it's probably a couple years old. And as I said earlier, the sense of belonging and value is so important for all staff, but especially a staff of color in this system. So our goal is to strengthen that group, provide opportunities for them to get together, for them to learn from one another, for them to connect to one another, and ultimately get a greater sense of belonging. And then finally, strengthen our mentoring program. We do have a mentoring program. We've had one for years, especially for new teachers. What we haven't had is a mentoring program that focuses on new support staff. And maybe even new administrators. So what we want to do moving forward is to build on what we're doing well in our mentoring program with teachers, to make sure that we are culturally responsive as we're looking at strategies that mentoring can add for our staff of color, and then expand that program to those beyond just teaching. Sounds good. That's commitment 2. And now I'm going to turn it over to commitment 3. Tara.
All right. So I'm Tara Young, and I was a part of the leadership in the subcommittee along with Shannon Garcia, who's not here with us this evening. And we also worked with an amazing group of district employees to really focus on honoring and building upon the strengths and assets of every student, promoting academic, social, emotional growth, and providing multiple pathways to success. This includes monitoring, assessing the impact of educational programs on the achievement of all students. So there's a lot there, right? We're looking at 3 different things when we talk about student success. We're talking about the academic success, we're talking about social emotional success, and we're talking about the multiple pathways to success. So what's happening when they leave our building and how are they finding success afterward? And if you look at our commitment on the organizational breakdown of all the metrics that we're using to report out for each commitment, you'll find that our commitment has the most reporting metrics by far of all the commitments. And so we really this year honed in on the academic success of our students. Not to say that we won't also in future years look at the social emotional growth and that multiple pathways to success, but because this commitment is so big, that's what we focused in on this year. But I think you'll see as you go through, although we focused on the academic success, when we start focusing on academic success, just by nature, we're going to be talking about social emotional growth. We're going to be talking about multiple pathways to success as well. So some of the top data points that we looked, and we got this from the 2021-2022 data profile that you probably are familiar with. So a lot of our data comes from that data profile. We really started looking at how successful are our students in the classroom. So some things that were really standing out to us, you'll notice that 50% of our Black students are in the striving learner category, and 30% of our Hispanic students are in the striving learner category. And when we say striving learner, that means we're talking about our lowest tracked classes. So typically that's our team talk classes. We're talking about our intervention courses, so our literacy course, our pause course, double period algebra, so a class where there needs to be some remediation done. And so we see we have an overrepresentation of our students of color in those striving learner courses. If we break it down even more, you'll see that our Hispanic students only make up 8.1% of AP courses, but they make up 23.9% of our striving learner courses and the 11.45% of our overall enrollment. Our Black students make up 1% of our AP courses, 4.5% of our striving learning courses, but only 1.93% of our overall enrollment. So we'll see that there's disproportionality happening. What we would like to see is if we have Hispanic students making up 11.5% of our overall enrollment, we would like to see 11.45% of our Hispanic students making up our AP courses, 11.45% of our Hispanic students in those striving learner courses. We want to see proportionality within our classes, and we're not seeing it right now. We're seeing an overrepresentation of Black and Hispanic students in those lowest tracked classes and an underrepresentation in our AP classes. You might say to yourself, well, if they're finding success at those levels, then is that a problem? And what we see from our data is that our students are not finding success. Okay, so if you look at the data, it reveals that Black and Hispanic students are failing courses at a higher rate than their white and Asian counterparts. Also, we want our students to reach for that highest level course, right? We want our students to be taking that rigorous AP coursework, or at least have access to them. And sometimes what happens when you have this tracked system is students who are in the lowest tracked classes don't have access to those AP classes. So not only do we have students who are disproportionately represented among the different tracks, we have our Black and Hispanic students are failing at larger rates, and there's not always a pathway to even access AP classes if you're placed into the lowest tracked classes. And one thing to note about the failure rates, it's not necessarily that those lowest tracked classes are resulting in more D's or F's, but it does make us ask some questions about the data, right? Like if these intervention courses were doing what they're intended to do, we would perhaps not see such large failure rates or increased failure rates of our Black and brown students, but we are seeing more D's and F's at those later. So we have to ask, are these intervention courses that we've put in place, are they working, right? And if you look at the data that we provided in the report, you'll also notice that we include test scores as well, like the SAT reports. So it's not just within our school, because you could say like, well, you know, Vernon Hills, Libertyville, those are high achieving schools. They're taking really rigorous classes. But if you look at our standardized test scores, you'll also notice that our Black and Hispanic students are not scoring nearly as high as their white and Asian counterparts. So that was the data that really stood out to us as our group started going through this. And so we really started to research heterogeneous classrooms. Heterogeneous classrooms are essentially just detracked classrooms where we don't have all these different tracks. And so when we started learning more about heterogeneous classrooms and de-tracking classrooms, the research shows that heterogeneous classrooms first leads to an increased sense of belonging for our students. And that's what we were talking about with our the first commitment, right? That we want our students to have a sense of belonging, and we want them to feel like they belong in this academic environment, right? And they are capable of succeeding at a really high rate. And what happens often is when you are in a tracked classroom, it's not a secret to students. Students know kind of where they fit in the class hierarchy. And that does decrease a student's sense of belonging. And the research reveals that it decreases a student's sense of belonging because they start to feel like they can't develop that academic mindset, or maybe they can't perform at the highest levels. The research also shows that there are appreciable effects on striving students' achievement when they are in heterogeneous classrooms, and there are typically no effects on average and high ability student achievement. So I think a lot of the concern with heterogeneous classroom comes in because people say, well, if you put all the students together, you're not going to be challenging your highest level students, right? They're not going to be, the expectations are going to be lowered for students, and what happens to those high flyers. And the research actually does not support that. The research shows that it's actually the success rate for your AP high flying students pretty much stays the same. And then the striving students have increased academic success. Now you will find, if you look into the research, that there are some schools who did not see those outcomes, and that is because of the implementation of the heterogeneous classrooms. So when the heterogeneous classrooms are implemented without sound efficacy and without sound professional learning, then it fails. And you do see students not performing at the high rates that we want them to. But when implemented well, we see really, really good outcomes. And then the heterogeneous classrooms also lead to improved cognitive skills, critical thinking, and problem solving skills, which is embedded into our Daring mission. That's what we want for all students, is to really come out of our high school with strong critical thinking skills, able to look at the world and be problem solvers. So we have some recommendations for the board. So the data and the research suggests that first, we need to move towards heterogeneous classrooms. Now, one of the things that came through in the data over and over again is this cannot be a rush decision. You can't just detrack all your classes and say, okay, we did it. We did the thing that we want to do, that it has to be done very, very mindfully. That comes with teacher buy-in. So there needs to be a lot of teacher engagement and inclusion in that process of detracking. There needs to be a lot of professional learning on how to differentiate in the classroom, because when you have a lot of learners that have a lot of different learning needs and learning abilities, the teacher needs to know how to be able to differentiate instruction effectively. You need to have the community involved, because otherwise you will see parent and community pushback if they're not involved in that, the decision of moving towards heterogeneous classrooms. And we then do need to think about class sizes and class optimums, as how do we make sure that we are not giving teachers so many students that they can't differentiate effectively. So we will might have to have a discussion about class sizes as well. We are already piloting an alternative pause structure at VHHS. So pause is one of our intervention programs for students who are struggling in their classes. We are going to be using this new piloted pause program to intensify math, literacy, and executive functioning skills with targeted one-to-one or small group intervention. Typically in the past, we've had literacy classes, and we've had double period math classes, and we're actually getting rid of those interventions. And instead, we are going to have teachers push into the pause program and do one-to-one and small group intervention instead of whole class intervention. So we're hoping that that will be an effective way to make sure we're still building in student support. And when we do this, it does increase student ability to select elective courses. You'll see, if you look at the perception data in the report, that a lot of our students, one of the lowest dips in student feedback we got is that they don't always feel like they have classes that prepare them for the real world, and they don't always feel like they have choice over their classes. And so this is a way to increase student choice over the electives that they take, because they will not have to take intervention courses. It will be built into the pause program. We also believe that we should continue to research the effectiveness of an advisory program. This is something that came up a lot in our subcommittee. We didn't research it. We really focused on the heterogeneous classrooms through our research. So we didn't research this specifically, but we do think, building on what you've heard my colleagues talk about, of that ability to mentor students, and because we care about their social emotional growth, that we should research the implementation of an advisory program where we could put an intentional SEL curriculum into place. It will provide more mentor opportunities so that every student, like Tom was talking about, every student has a teacher mentor who is looking out for them and advocating on their behalf. An advisory program could help to identify and explore student passions and potential post-secondary plans. And we can continue to provide targeted intervention in that advisory program. So that's something that we didn't get to research during our time together this year, but we would recommend that we do further research on what an effective advisory program would look like in D128. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Singleton.
Hi, my name is Ann Singleton. I am an English teacher and the equity coordinator here at Libertyville High School. And on this committee, I worked with Tiffany Scott as a co-leader. She is one of our school counselors here at Libertyville, and she's not able to be here tonight. And Rita was also part of this team. So I may be asking Rita at points to jump in and share some of the things we talked about with our group. We were one of the smaller groups, but our commitment that we worked on is ensuring all students have access to a diverse, multicultural, inclusive curriculum that avoids stereotypes and includes perspectives of multiple identities in order to build their awareness as they see themselves in the curriculum and help all students as they seek to understand the varied perspectives and realities of others. So this very much links directly with that daring mission that Tom talked about at the beginning. So for this particular commitment, there were two metrics that the policy states. And the first one on there was a curriculum audit, which was not something that we had this year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So our data then went right to the Panorama survey that was given in November to all of our students. And we looked in particular at the two questions that are related to curriculum, because of course our commitment is focused on that. What are students learning about? What are they doing in their classes? And so we took a look at it and we broke it down by race. And the way Panorama set it up is it takes what it considers favorable responses and groups them together and showed us for that particular racial identity group, this is how they responded in the favorable way. So for the first question, to what extent do you believe the school curriculum, lessons, textbooks, videos, et cetera, include the perspective and experiences of a diverse population? And when we disaggregated that by race, students who responded almost always or frequently, those are the percentages that Panorama gave us. So 36% of our American Indian or Alaska Native students responded almost always or frequently, 38% of our Asian students, 31% of our Black and African American students, 36% of our Hispanic and Latino students, 50% of our Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander students, 49% of our white students, and 43% of our students who identify as two or more races. So we talked about this one in our team a bit. And one of the things that we noted is overall, those percentages are a lot lower than what we'd want them to be. We want our students, I mean, that's part of our daring mission, to talk about, to be aware and to be inquisitive and to be global. And these numbers aren't showing what we want them to show. So that was definitely a concern that we had as a team. The other question that we looked at in particular, although there's some other ones listed within the longer report, but these are the two we wanted to make sure we highlighted, is to what extent do you see yourself, your identities represented in the curriculum, lessons, textbooks, videos, et cetera, that your teachers use? And this one, I think this one was covered as well in commitment one a bit, but what was interesting about this one, the way we had to look at it disaggregated is it included not only almost always, frequently, it also included sometimes. And our group talked a lot about like, what does sometimes really even mean? And the other question that we had with this is, how are students seeing themselves represented in the curriculum, right? Are they only seeing it through struggles and challenges, or are they seeing celebrations of their identity? And another question that we had a lot of questions, y'all. Another question that we had was, well, looking at this, how are our students answering this question, thinking about their identity? Were they thinking about their racial identity? Were they thinking about their gender identity, their sexual identity, their religious identity? So that was another question that we had a lot. So, you know, you could see the numbers up here. The numbers are a little bit higher, right? But it does also incorporate that sometimes, which the other question, the first data point there, or the first question I have on here, had the option of sometimes, but for some reason it wasn't grouped favorably. So looking at these, again, the numbers are higher, but we felt like we needed a lot more information before we could go further. And that would have been that curriculum audit. So I'll talk about that in regards to our research points. So there we go. We spent some time talking about what kind of curriculum documents do we have. We have book lists on the class websites. Most of us on this particular committee were English teachers, so I don't know if that says something about how English teachers are interested in curriculum more than other departments, but so we talked about, well, we have book lists. We could look at that. We could take a look at, standards and targets documents that we have from different departments. But our concern was that if we did an internal audit, we would have our own bias showing up within that. And so Rita did some research for us and found an option I'll talk about in a moment that our team recommended and that the district will be moving forward with using an outside organization. But before I talk about that, in the meantime, a curriculum audit is a pretty big project to take on, not something that we knew would be able to get started this year in this timeframe. We said, well, in the meantime, let's research what does student voice look like in curriculum development. So in your packet, you'll see that we have our annotated bibliography there. And so we looked through these articles together and discussed all the ways in which we wanted to make sure that our students have opportunities to share what it's like in their classes, what they're learning about and what they want to learn about. And what could those be? What sort of ways could we share through professional learning or other spaces to increase the amount of student voice that's showing up? Because we know that some is already happening, but it's really about like, how can we do that more? And how can we do that in more of a systemic way? So it's impacting all of our students. So our recommendations then, the first one is a curriculum audit, which then leads to the equity action plan, which I'll talk about in a moment. But in regards to that student voice, one of the suggestions that we have is to continue professional learning opportunities for teachers on multicultural and culturally responsive education, project-based learning, using surveys in class to increase student voice, and using student choice for content instruction and assessment. We have teachers in both buildings who have been working on all of these topics, but it's smaller groups here and there. And so what we'd like to see is more of a systemic approach to some of these topics. We've already started seeing that with the culturally responsive education workshops this year, but project-based learning, we've had people attend workshops now for years on that. And there's so much knowledge right here in this district and some amazing work that's happening. You just have to look on the Twitter feed. It's awesome. But we really want to see that become more of a systemic approach. And we think we might be ready for that. So that would be one of our recommendations. Another thing that came up was student advisory groups came up in the research. It's a great place for students to have voice and share their experiences in school through their classroom, class experiences, extracurricular activities, athletics, any other aspect of school. Because really, while curriculum, we do talk about classroom, there's curriculum in clubs, there's curriculum in athletics. And here at LHS, we have what's known as the Principal Advisory Board, where students meet once a month. This was something that Dr. K started when he came here. And within that group, we have a subgroup that focuses on curriculum. They meet with Mr. Ray Albin, our assistant principal, during our monthly meetings. And what we'd like to see is increasing these student advisory groups. The great thing about Principal Advisory Group, it's during the school day. So it increases access for students who have commitments outside of school. They only miss one class a month. And it's a different class period each month. So it really is something that's built within the day. And of course, students know if they've got an important test that day and they need to miss that month, that's okay, no problem. You're still a member of the team and we still want to see you when you're able to come. And it creates that opportunity and that relationship where they feel really comfortable going to Dr. K or going to the other members, the other staff on that team. So we'd love to see that be something that we have at both schools, as well as thinking about like the Vernon Hills Student Diversity Council. Are there ways to kind of have that be a space where students can share their experiences with curriculum and other areas of school? And then the last thing on there, we just wanted to give a quick shout out that something we've been doing for years, the student school board representatives, is something that the research says is a great way to bring in student voice and include students in curriculum work. So that's something that I don't think they're here tonight, so I can't give them the shout out, but in 2 weeks, they definitely deserve a shout out for being part of that group. So I want to talk a little bit more about the Equity Action Plan. And I'll go over it, and then Rita, if there's anything that I missed, please feel free to jump in. Okay. So District 128, I'm so excited to tell you, has hired Dr. Yvette Dubiel to help us develop an equity action plan. Dr. Dubiel is part of Illinois Coalition of Equity Educational Leaders. She's actually one of the founders of the group. And she is absolutely
amazing woman who will be helping us semester 1 of next year to develop an equity action plan. So this will include a curriculum audit along with a lot of other stuff. It's all in that visual there. I know it's kind of hard to see, but basically it's set up where we will identify actions that we can take for second semester next year to advance our systemic equity work. So Dr. Dubiel recommends either 4 full-day workshops with this or meetings or 8 half-day sessions. And so we opted for that 8 half-days. And early on, the first 2 half-days will be just kind of identifying and finding information. What do we have, as well as building the capacity for the team to have those conversations about equity and think about things in a systems way. And then as we move forward between each of the workshops that we'll have in the meetings we have with Dr. Dubiel, we will have work that as team members that we'll have to do to find information and bring that information back. And as of right now, I think we have dates selected for the meetings, maybe a little final approval. Yeah.
Yeah, the dates are also in the written report for the date of that meeting.
Yeah. So this is something that where there were a lot of things that we were hoping, at least my team, we were really hoping we could have done more with our commitment, but we found that until we really know what's going on curriculum wise, we weren't able to move as far forward as we would like. And so we're excited next year that this will give us a chance to do that work for that commitment, as well as the other commitments we talked about tonight. And I think really all the commitments in our policy. So,
and I would just add too that really the timing of the equity action plan was intentionally designed to begin once the strategic planning process had been completed, so that that body of work would be known in the development of the equity action plan as led by Dr. Dubiel. It might be also important to note that the equity action plan includes 5 strands that align to some of our other reporting metrics as well. The equity action plan will look at systems, at teaching and learning, at student voice, climate and culture, professional learning, and family and community as agency. So this is a well-developed model for an equity action plan that's been used in other local districts and is really highly regarded in the area. When you put out a question to my network, the CADCA organization, which is the Chicago Area Directors of Curriculum and Assessment, responses to anyone doing equity audits and equity plans, Dr. Dubiel's name always comes up first. So she's a very busy consultant, but also a very effective one, and one that is highly regarded in the area.
so moving forward then, some next steps in our wrap up here is the Board of Education and District Administration review the report and consider implementation of our recommended actions. We wrote what you might notice a rather lengthy report, and we have all of our recommendations there with timelines and other information. The district leadership team will continue monitoring and reporting on remaining policy commitments. We are so excited to have our new Director of Equity and Inclusion, Mr. Larry Varn, here with us tonight in the audience. So we're excited to share with him the work that we've been doing and hear his ideas and perspectives and work with him as we move forward. And then we'll be preparing for that formal equity audit in the fall of 2022. And that's it. That's my wrap up. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I want to thank you for all this work. It's tremendous work. I really appreciate the focus on really looking at the data, to really looking at what's the reality and moving forward from there. It got a great start. I will tell you, Dr. Dubiel is terrific. She will push you to think of things in ways that you maybe aren't currently thinking. She's big on looking at data from an intersectionality perspective. She's just terrific. We've at the district where I work, we've worked with her for a number of years, and she's just terrific to work with. She'll guide you right down the right path. So, and our equity plan is based on the plan that you were speaking to. So, I really appreciate the work, and I think we're off to a good start. Anyone else have questions, comments?
Well, I guess my main question is, where are we in the process in order to be even having this conversation at because it seems like, are we still teasing out where we want to go? Or are we in big, because I do have some questions about the student success commitment. But I don't even know if it's appropriate to bring it out if it's still being teased out within the committee.
I think it would be important to bring out questions, concerns, comments. I think that's what we're hoping for, is a dialogue. This is what the point of focus for this year's DELT committee was. Again, there are 11 commitments. We chose 4 to focus on, being coming out of the pandemic. So we took a deeper dive into these 4. So I think it would be very helpful for us to receive feedback from the board. And again, these, I think, are recommendations based on our baseline data. So talking about them trying to be as data-based as possible. I think that because this policy was authored last March, and you adopted it and it required metrics, us coming to you now, sort of as we're finishing up the strategic planning process, we just felt that we needed to fulfill that commitment, and that some of this information will probably feed directly into some of the goals that we might have for strategic planning. So while they're on sort of separate paths right now because of the difference in starting and ending times, I definitely see them informing one another.
So I guess my initial question, and I'm going to plead ignorance in not knowing the day to day. I was surprised to even hear the term tracking, as I've had 2 students go through this school in the district. I never envisioned their participation as a tracked. And I've had my own children have gone AP and have paused, so I've seen both perspectives, but I never really, I never used that terminology and saw it as a tracking. So when we use the terminology detracking, and I guess my first question is, how do you define that? What does that look like if we're talking about a potential end game of having a detracking system? What does that look like? That would be my first question. And my second question, I don't know that we have a good definition to community and parents about what this striving learner / team taught classes are. Again, I'm gonna say ignorance, I'm gonna plead ignorance of not knowing the system, but I assumed all of our students were kind of on a default. I don't want to say, I know in our data we call it a college prep readiness. I always use general education, just a general education. So I assumed that everybody was at least on this kind of college prep general education, and we made differentiation based on what they needed. I have my experience with Team Taught as it was presented to me as this is a class that has 2 teachers, but the material, the scope and sequence, and the expectations are the same as if they were in a general or college prep class of the same title, yet they have 2 teachers. And yes, there are students in there who need additional support, but not. So I think we need to define, what is this Team Taught? Because it's not being presented. It's not being presented consistently in one way, at least in my experience. So those are my first 2 kind of concerns. That are we saying that if a student is in this striving learner, they have no potential to be in a general ed? Or I thought all of them were in a college prep. So I guess I would want more information on what that is looking like.
So before you answer it, I just want to let you know, I had pretty much the same questions, and I just figured I'm not from the education industry. So I think it will help me to kind of understand what these terms actually mean before I can evaluate what they mean.
Well, I can go ahead and start, and Tara can chime in too. You did a very nice job with the overview. I think that what the committee is recommending is actually answering the questions more clearly that you were talking about is the data that we have. First of all, we were really careful to not try and say you're a striving learner student or this or that. It's which category of courses are you in? Because you can have a student who's maybe really struggles with reading, but excels in math. And so you could have a student who is participating in different levels of courses that we offer. I think that one of the things that we're seeing is in our team taught sections, while teachers are doing their absolute best to try and maintain consistent expectations for those students, when you have all of the students in a given section of a class who have identified areas of struggle in that, it's very difficult, even with 2 teachers, to continue to keep the high level of rigor moving forward. When we break our student achievement data down, we see that students, so we are trying to put them in a supportive environment. We are trying to, with 2 teachers, we're differentiating the curriculum, but the progress that we see for those students on SAT and some other standardized tests continues to still be lower than their grade level peers. So I think one of the things that our committee was saying is we are a district who we have invested resources in trying to close this achievement gap. But one of the things our data is showing is that our current structure is still perpetuating that. So our recommendation isn't to do away with honors or anything like that. It is to say, can we look at ways where rather than having all the students who struggle in one section, are there other ways that we could think of that are more inclusive, that students will have opportunities to be with their peers and to have higher expectations? So our committee is also on that same journey of taking a deep dive this year on who are the groups who are struggling, what interventions are we currently using, and are those interventions being helpful? So this idea of exploring heterogeneous options, we also did hear from some students who talked about, even though we never build students' schedules on tracks, they talk about being in this group that goes from this support class to this support class to this support class, and they don't have a lot of interaction with their other grade level peers except in some electives and other courses like that. So while that's a small portion of the students, when we do ask them questions about that, they do report feeling like a subgroup traveling through their day, just because of the way their courses are scheduled. Tara, would you add anything else to that?
A lot of times research showed, and what I've seen in classes, which were intended as interventions, right? Two classroom teachers trying to provide interventions for those students who need it. Oftentimes, because students see themselves in that class, and they start to develop an academic where they don't see themselves as a learner, and they see themselves in the like down class, but it's not. But that is often a student perception, and that can really impact ways in which they see what they're able to do. And so one of the things that we want to do by having therapy is not that every student have access to those learners. Often when you are although the goal is to exit class, and that's always the goal, that doesn't always happen, and then students never access those more rigorous.
I guess I'm confused though, because one of the recommendations, or if I'm looking at the timeline for implementation, beginning next school year, co-taught classes will be offered in both buildings, and they are currently offered in both buildings.
So thank you for mentioning that. So co-taught is different than team taught.
Can I interrupt for a second? Should you be on mic so that do we have people watching remotely
Oh,
right
that's
now?
a good point on.
You should be on mic. Thank you.
That way, anybody who's watching the stream will be able to hear you.
Yeah, so thanks for asking that question because co-taught is different than team taught. So team taught classes right now are taught by 2 content experts. Co-taught classes are taught by a content expert and then an expert in special education. And so the goal of the co-taught class, and we have these types of classes that are running at LHS. They're not currently running in the same way at Vernon Hills, but will be next year. The co-taught classes, the goal is that it will be identical. Because right now we say that the team taught classes and the on-level classes, or what you might call the college prep classes, we say that they're identical, but the reality is they're often not identical. Okay. And that's because the students in those team taught classes they learn at much different paces. And there are many, many more dependent learners. And so it just is impossible to stay on track with those on-level classes. What a co-taught class does is it brings in the content teacher, right? The content expert. And then you have a special education there who works alongside with that content expert to help to differentiate for students who have IEPs, who need more accommodations. And so it's a different model. And this is a model that we are currently exploring. We just sent a team this year to learn more about the co-taught model. I am not an expert on it. So if anyone else wants to jump in and speak to it, that would be wonderful. But it is a different model of teaching and will be identical to the on-level classes while providing the necessary scaffolds and interventions for those students who do need additional supports.
So then what happens in a heterogeneous class? Does the teacher become a single teacher who's doing the content and the intervention and differentiating for all of the levels in their class?
Yes. And so that's why we talked about we need to make sure that in those heterogeneous classrooms, we have first teachers who believe that you need teacher buy-in. Teachers need to believe that these heterogeneous classes can work and will work. So we need to make sure that we have teacher buy-in, that we have teacher engagement, and that professional learning around differentiation, which is going to be so important. The research shows that heterogeneous classrooms work when you have those things in place.
But that is, and Tara's correct, but that is not an absent of academic interventions. So right now, what you've got are one model of putting students together who we believe require interventions throughout the year. And you deliver it in a team taught model with 2 teachers focused on delivering the intervention in the classroom. What more schools are doing and what the research is showing is very effective. And what some of the discussion that we've had even internally is to be more flexible in terms of the intervention and when students receive the intervention and how long they receive an intervention for. So if you were to go to more heterogeneous classes, what you would do is you would create more flexible models of intervention where either an interventionist is pushed in at times to work with groups of students, or where you have students who are in need of that intervention getting that support outside of the actual classroom period. So that instead of it being right in the class during that time, only some of the students may require the intervention. They would go to that during their day. They would get that support. The other students who didn't need that intervention would not go during that time. They would have other things that they would be able to do.
But in a differentiated, homogeneous classroom, students would still be aware that they're receiving interventions, whether it is in the classroom or outside of the classroom. So the idea that their identity as a learner is somehow different in a heterogeneous classroom doesn't make sense to me.
Well, in a heterogeneous classroom, what happens frequently is that you normalize intervention for all students because we're all learning and we're all growing. And so what happens is rather than it being a system-wide view that intervention is reserved only for kids who struggle and that those students struggle, if they struggle all the time and they need intervention all the time. What this does is it says intervention is much more flexible. We may all benefit from it at various times, and it's open and accessible to all students. And so what that does is it kind of normalizes this type of support being applied to anybody in the school who needs it in any given time for a specific skill, versus saying, well, you've struggled historically in math. You might be pretty solid in this math class we're going to put you in, but because you've struggled historically, we're going to put you in a class where there's intervention built in every single day to your class. So, you know, it's a different approach that we have. And what it does is it allows kids to start to be more aware of their skill development. It starts to mean that interventions are shorter term in duration. So I might only need support for a specific skill that might be 2 to 3 weeks of time. And after that, I don't necessarily need the intervention. And therefore, I don't have to spend my time during the day in an intervention period. It's more of a flexible use of time for me.
I see. I guess I'm concerned that it doesn't have the potential to have a significant impact on student self-identification. And I'm even more concerned about our teachers and putting an onerous burden on a teacher to shift their teaching to a much more complicated method. And I'm acutely aware of this in our post-pandemic environment, because teachers are telling us we're struggling. We don't have enough time. We can't do everything that we want to do, and we know we want to deliver to our students. And to add the burden of converting their teaching to a heterogeneous yet differentiated environment seems to me too big of an ask.
So I appreciate you asking these questions, Lisa, because these are the same questions that came up in our subcommittee. I mean, you could feel sometimes in our subcommittee, the burden that the teachers were carrying, the exhaustion that teachers were feeling. And also the same fear of like, is this really going to work for our students? Will it increase their sense of belonging in the classroom for the very reasons that you just stated? So two things that I'm thinking about and that we talked about in our subcommittee group. So one of the research articles that we read was one by Jo Bowler, who's a math teacher, and she talks about, you can read the study. I won't get into the details of it, but in one particular heterogeneous classroom study that she did, they found that classrooms that fostered what did she call it? A community of respect, where all students knew that they had something to bring to the table and they had something to learn at the table. That I have assets that you don't have, and you have assets that I don't have.
But I'm going to push back on you there, because I believe our teachers are already trying to create that kind of environment. That in their classrooms, they do create an environment where all of their learners are valued and may have something to bring to the table. So I'm not convinced that you need a heterogeneous classroom in order to promote that particular idea.
I think there's one example though, and I would agree, Lisa, there are so many instances where our teachers are differentiating and, being model teachers in terms of what this model would be striving for. But the actual structure of our team taught sections is homogeneous, and it is all students who need help. And so I think some of the things that you're imagining our teachers doing are happening in our college prep classes, because they have a wide range of learners and teachers are already doing that. And it's already happening in all of our elective classes. So our elective teachers are excellent at doing this because they see all learners all together. So we know our teachers can do this and do this well. It right now is our system is placing students who struggle all in the same classroom, making it very difficult, even with differentiation and even with other strategies, to get students to perform at that high level.
And I think too, what I heard you say, Lisa, is that like the teachers have high expectations of the students. They believe that every student can do the learning. And I think I agree with you, but students don't always believe that about each other. And so I think what we want to make sure we're doing, and what this research article showed, is that the students believed it about each other, and they believed that they were not only responsible. It was really very surprising to me when I read it. But what they believed was that they were not only responsible for their own learning, but they believed that they were responsible for their learning of their classmates. And so it wasn't just this, like, I'm good at this and you're not good at that. It was like, I'm good at this and I'm going to help you be good at that too. And it was a give and take. And it was a really impressive outcome of the study that I was not expecting.
That, by the way, has a great deal to do with the quality of the teacher. So that's where that training piece comes in, is that we will have to have that quality. But not that we don't now, but you're juggling in a different way.
I'd like to just challenge us all in that one of the things that happens frequently in organizational change is that you can look at technical change and technical solutions. And in technical change and solutions, the answer is known already. Somebody has already figured it out. And you bring in an expert or you bring in a manual and you review it and you retool your system in order to get that outcome. When we think about leading for equity and when we think about adaptations for inclusion of all learners, what we're really doing is we're talking about adaptive change. And that's Ronald Heifetz's work. And adaptive change is process and iteration and very much design thinking. And so in adaptive change, the answer isn't necessarily known. The solution isn't necessarily known. But what you have to do is you don't make a change in isolation. So to your point, Lisa, if we just created heterogeneous classes, absent any differences in how we use time, absent in any differences in how we use our interventions to support our students, absent in any differences in how we're measuring achievement, all we're really doing is taking a bandwidth of a class that we know is heterogeneous to begin with, but we believe is homogeneous because we're making arbitrary slices of our students and saying, this is the bandwidth of a typical AP student. This is the bandwidth of a typical college prep student. And within this, our teachers can manage it. What we're trying to do is say that bandwidth can be widened. That bandwidth can be widened. And within an adaptive solution of our system, yes, the teacher does have responsibilities to teach in different ways, but it's not all on the teacher. There's a different use of time. There's a different use of intervention. There's a different use of structures within our system that ultimately results in us being something very different as an organization than just a change to how we're grouping students in the class. And I think that's the work that I always try to keep in mind is as we do this work, the implications are to become more heterogeneous in our student groupings, but to remind ourselves that that requires adaptive change around for that model to be successful.
And
To address that, because just one point, because as I was looking at the presentation and reading, what I was coming to you is that you need to have a combination of changes to have the desired outcome. If you just made it heterogeneous, for example, it's not going to have the right results. It's really having that complete structure in place.
Yes.
Make
and
it
That's
effective.
why I asked you, where
Yeah.
are we in this process? Because it seems like we're in the baby steps of the thinking about it process.
Yes, I mean, I would say you are right about baby steps and all the research that we looked at. And we also looked at models of surrounding schools who have moved towards heterogeneous classrooms. And most schools who start to make their classrooms heterogeneous, it's a 2 to 3 year rollout process of getting the teacher buy-in, doing the professional learning, and then it's that continual monitoring to ensure that we are, creating the learning environments that we want for our students. So we do need to do more learning. We can't just say, okay, we're taking this all away for next year, because like Lisa said, our teachers are exhausted. And if we made this drastic change for next school year, that would, I think, be detrimental to our teachers and then therefore to our students too. So it needs to be very mindfully and thoughtfully rolled out.
Can you
And I
give
just-
some examples of schools locally that you've looked at?
Yeah, so we looked at Evanston Township High School and Oak Park's model as well that have moved towards heterogeneous classrooms. And they also don't all start in the same discipline. So a lot of times you'll see that English classes start first. Math classes are usually the last ones to be detracked. I'm not a math person, but I've talked to some math people who talk about how complicated it can be to detrack the math classrooms. And so oftentimes, I'm trying to think of Oak Park's model that we included in the report. They give their timeline for detracking. And I believe it was 2 years between the initial conversations and then the first detracked classroom. That was at their freshman level English class. So it wasn't all at once either, but it was slow and very controlled.
District 214 is also working this, and Rita and a number of our administrators attended some various webinars on that. And Stevenson High School has been working on some aspects of this. And so around us, like John and I as principals, when we attend a lot of our principal meetings, these are conversations that we're talking about as well with building leadership, just in the ways that districts are looking at this and working to kind of find ways to begin to initiate some of these changes at their schools.
I also think the word detracking it's the category, or if you do a search term on what the research around this is, I think that that word for us isn't as appropriate as the idea of inclusion in grade level content and being with your peers. So we see this as the inclusion part, rather than students who are struggling being separated into a section of just students who struggle. To say, we know that through peer support, through differentiated instruction, and through other things, we can help these students see themselves as learners, provide the support they do need, because if there is an achievement gap, it's not going to close unless they have the skills and the knowledge and other things like that. But can we find a way to provide them with the skills and knowledge they need, but not have to have them be segregated from their grade level peers?
Can I ask a clarifying question regarding honors and AP courses? So we have our college prep, and we're proposing to make more heterogeneous these college prep courses and bring the bottom up, maybe bring not the top down, but you meet in the middle, I suppose, kind of. I'm saying it wrong.
What we want to do is
Leaving the top there.
Yeah.
Got it. But can you tell me how does this all play out in an honors and AP format?
so what we really want to do with all of this is expand access to our most rigorous, most challenging courses. And we want to see a greater representation of all of our students having the ability, if they choose, to take those classes and be part of those academic environments. So it's not about a reduction in the top, saying we don't want to push our kids this hard. What we want to do is we want to create the opportunities for all of our students to enter those academic areas. And so what that looks like is something we call diagonal movement, where a student starts in, maybe they're in the college prep level, and through the development of their identity, their academic identity, through the development of their skills, they start to recognize, I am able to take and move myself into an AP class or an honors class in this subject area. For some students, they come in and they already feel confident with that. And they'll say, well, I'm going to take honors biology and I'm going to take honors math. I could take honors English, but I'm not gonna because I don't really like English and I want to be an engineer. Other students don't have that sophisticated sense of that. And as we work with them and as we build their skills, we say, you're doing very well here. You could push yourself into this honors or AP track. And so what we do by doing that is we start to look to see more proportionality among our students of who is taking those classes, rather than just sort of accept that these classes are for this certain type of student. Mm-hmm. It's an idea of getting our students to believe from day one of their freshman year that if they don't have the skills that they believe are going to get them into an AP or an honors class, they don't have them yet. And through the work, through our curriculum, through them taking advantage of the systemic interventions we have in place, through the work of our teachers, we can build their skills so that they can make that trajectory before they graduate.
Okay, so not limiting them to kind of stagnating in these lower level courses over time, but giving them the opportunity to literally take those, well, not literally, abstractly, take those walls down and cross diagonally into potentially more challenging, more rigorous coursework, which I love and I think is a fantastic kind of point that you're making here. Can I just give you my broad kind of interpretation here, kind of my questions, and while I have the mic. So I'm blown away by the data you collected, by the evidence you gathered, by the articles that you had in your presentation. I poured over this yesterday and today, and I totally blown away at the quality of the work and the thoughtfulness of the conclusions that were reached. Commitment 1, 2, and 4, totally on board with it. It makes so much sense. And as, you know, to borrow a phrase from our young people, I'm vibing it, right? I'm vibing with it. I don't even know. I'm not that interesting anymore. But the point is, right, I'm picking up what you're putting down, and I think it's fantastic. I really struggle and have some major concerns with regard to the detracking. And I'm really wondering if we're just kind of putting the horse before the cart with it. I'm wondering if we can focus on commitments 1, 2, and it's labeled here as 6, but we'll call it our 4th commitment. Really, you know, kind of foster and cultivate our energy towards accomplishing those, and then kind of seeing where we're at, and then maybe talk more about detracking. And I really thought about some of these example districts you had put forth, ETHS and OPRF. And when I immediately thought of them, I thought of, well, those are kind of quasi-urban demographics we're looking at. And certainly they may have different needs and just kind of a different set of circumstances than our whole student and body and community have. Not that that disqualifies us from eventually moving toward tracking, but I just detracking. I wonder if we just may go about it differently. I wonder if addressing commitments 1, 2, and 4 prior to really digging our teeth into commitment 3 may be beneficial. I also have a thought that perhaps maybe something that we could propose to do is pilot an entire detracking program, to almost create a school within a school model to see how this goes, collect our own district level data, and then tweak and implement as necessary. Because if I'm being honest with you, I'm an educator. I'm totally understanding and loving what I'm hearing from you. I support so much of it. But when I just think of the buy-in required to have this drastic paradigm shift happen within our community, I'm very concerned about the length of time it will take and the energy required to make that happen. And this community likes evidence of things working. I think everyone knows at this point, I've been a D128 resident pretty much my entire life. And you can go back 23 years ago now to when the new school, Vernon Hills, was built. And so much evidence was needed, and so much data, and so many promotional videos, and all of these teams were needed to just even introduce this thought that, oh, perhaps, yes, we're overflowing here at LHS. Perhaps we need more space. And I'm not saying we haven't grown and changed and progressed from 23 years ago, but we live in an intelligent community that requires, I feel, a lot of evidence for the things that we do. And I personally, as a stakeholder, would encourage some type of piloted program before we really pushed to include our entire D128 community in this detracking model. So I'm very open-minded to it. I have a gazillion other questions that I will not put out here tonight, but I just think we may need a little more evolution of this idea.
Yeah, and I agree. And just to be clear, this committee is not recommending to you a specific detracking model. And we're not saying next year we immediately begin this. What we're talking about, though, that I believe the board supports, is the expanding of access for students into higher level courses so that they can reach their full potential. And that's really the driving force behind this, is not to just universally detrack in a quick order, but to say, if our goal is to expand access for our students who are capable of making those diagonal moves and move higher, what is the system? What are the structures that we need to put in place over a period of time in order to make that happen? And how do we do it in a responsible way so that we're gathering the data and we're preparing not only the students and the parents, but our staff in order to do that well?
We also need to include, like, this was just one subcommittee filled with some teachers, some department supervisors. So it needs to become a much broader conversation that involves not only the community stakeholders, but stakeholders within our own district. That includes all department supervisors. So as Tom said, it's the beginning of our recommendation towards movement, but we know that there are a lot of conversations that need to happen in the next year or 2 years in order to make sure that we are ready to roll out a plan that will, as Tom said, increase access to those higher level classes.
Can I ask some nuts and bolts questions real quick? Academic literacy is taught at both schools or just Vernon Hills?
Just Vernon Hills currently.
Okay. And is there an accelerated academic literacy offering?
There's academic literacy at this point for freshmen and for sophomores. So they move up from literacy 1 to literacy 2 as they move from 9th grade to 10th grade.
But I mean,
But
is
there's
there,
not like an
there's an honors credit level?
No.
So right now, freshmen all take English,
Yes.
regardless of whether they were, I don't know if we use Explore Plan anymore. So because those are the numbers that I know, regardless of where they tested in, every freshman takes
So
English.
Freshman and literacy English and literacy are 2 different classes. So
Right. So
literacy-
I'm just looking at, it says academic literacy 1, and then sophomore year is academic literacy 2.
And
to-
those are for students who have been identified as needing additional interventions and remediation.
Academic
Those
literacy
students
2.
are probably
Otherwise, they would
also
go
in teen talk.
into argumentation, debate, Bibles, literature, college prep writing.
Those are
and so on.
senior electives.
Those are all, it says they're offered to 10th grade.
Correct, but seniors take them
Yes.
most of
Yeah,
all.
once
because-
in a while you'll
Mhm.
get a sophomore or a junior, but primarily they're senior electives.
Okay. So we also offer to 9th graders Emergent Multilingual class. What is that?
So the Emergent Multilingual class, it goes along with like a literacy component. So typically a student would be in an English class and they would be in Emergent Multilingual class. They would not also be in academic literacy on top of that. So they would not typically have those 3 because the literacy services are offered through the EM services.
And
Those are the classes for our English learners.
Right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
they are taking that as their English support class.
So that's not a question of them taking a tract class necessarily. That's a support class because they're English language learners.
Yes, and it then limits their capacity to then later on take certain electives. We have certain electives in our school that require prerequisites so that you must take elective 1 for your business class, for example, junior year, so that way you can take the higher level marketing class your senior year. And if a student is in academic literacy classes earlier on, it doesn't allow them to ever get to those higher level classes down the line. So it's not an explicit track, but it is an implicit track in some ways because it might limit their ability to get to some of those classes later on because their schedule is so tied to their intervention classes alongside the regular core curricular classes that every student takes.
Okay. So what I'm trying to do is find out pretty much for freshmen though, we're already in heterogeneous classrooms.
There are
Wow.
freshman team taught classes, freshman college prep, and freshman honors classes. There are 3 different levels.
That's what I was asking.
And
So are
it's
there 3
typically-
levels of academic literacy?
No, academic literacy, there's only 1 level and it's almost always going to be your students who are in the team taught English classes. Every once in a while, you get 1 or 2 students who are in the college prep class. So those students are taking 2 classes within the ELA department. They're taking a literacy class and their English usually team taught.
All right. I
freshman
see the
class.
mistake that I'm making.
Yeah.
This is split up on 2 pages. And while I have the full page here, there is another page of offerings. Okay, so now I understand. So that gets back to the nuts and bolts. Are we talking about then, say, like Oak Park did, taking freshman English and saying, we're going to start here? Or are we thinking, what we really want to do is we want to take all freshman level class. Actually, Oak Park did take all freshman level classes after 3 years, right? So they studied and then they implemented all freshman classes were not tracked.
And oftentimes a school like Evanston High School will include an earned honors option so that way all students are taking the same course, but there are certain, additional projects or depending on the grades that they earn in certain, big ticket items along the way,
Right.
they could earn the honors within the same classroom setting with the same teacher.
Okay.
These
'Cause
are not- oh, sorry.
I was trying to get to Kara's point, like the whole drastic paradigm shift. Is it a drastic paradigm shift?
It might not be. We haven't decided that yet. We haven't decided exactly where we're starting with what class, if it's a smaller pilot group that we're starting with. So these are all the decisions that need to be
Right.
made.
So from us right now, what we're looking for is support to continue looking.
Exploring.
Yes.
Right.
I'm all for it. I support continuing to look. I'm not ready to jump into it next year.
Neither are we.
No.
Ditto.
Okay.
But I do think you've uncovered something that's pretty imminent, that does need to be addressed today. How are we support, I mean, what you're saying is, where what I'm hearing is those learners who need additional support are not making growth. It's in our equity because they can also be identified as certain subgroups of our population. So as much as, yeah, we're going to look at this and see what happens, but it seems to me you also have a pretty imminent problem to work out.
I think
Like
it is.
now.
I think it is imminent. And I think, I feel very passionately about this, but the trends that we see in our school, these are national trends, right? That when we see this data, like it shouldn't surprise us because this is linked to historic inequities. And so I feel very passionately that it is our responsibility as a district to start to kind of radically, but methodically and intentionally rethink how we provide instruction to our students and the ways in which we're providing access to students. Because I think if we don't, we will continue to see the same learning outcomes.
I keep coming back and being kind of surprised that we're even using the word tracked, as I just have not heard that in the 6 years that we've been here. And then I think we are not, I think that our message of what a team taught class looks like and what their purpose is not being consistently presented. And it was a presentation of it is a grouping of students who do need intervention with another grouping of students who are also college prep that happen to fit in their schedule.
That it would be co-taught.
Yeah, that's not a team talk.
So
class.
I just want to maybe make sure you're leading tonight's discussion with those two distinctions. Co-taught classes are a general education teacher and a special education teacher. But in order for it to maintain its general education status, there can be no more than 1/3 of students who have an IEP. So it's built into the model because so much of the law and access for IDEA is trying to build inclusion with their grade level peers. That is the problem with team taught. It is almost 100% of students who have struggles. They still have two teachers, but just how IDEA calls for inclusion because there's so much evidence that when students are learning and just being near a person who is modeling the right way to start an essay, all of those other kind of peer supports that naturally come in a very active classroom, those things are absent when you have only students who struggle. So how
In our district, our two teacher classrooms are a team taught.
our team taught would be 2 algebra teachers, 2 English teachers, where our co-taught is a model for delivering special education services. And those are heterogeneous classes. That is exactly what we would be advocating. We try and do more of. Absolutely.
So currently our team taught classes are homogeneous classes. They are all recommended to get that intervention level support with 2 teachers at the same time. I stood up because I wanted to make a connection back to C1 belonging. And I want to bring some student perspectives into the room right now. They're not here sitting next to me, but I just want to tell you 2 quick stories that kind of connect to what we're talking about and how taking off the limitations to be able to access the higher level courses, how it increases student belonging. I'm going to tell you about a student named Jocelyn, and Jocelyn is representative of many students I've taught over the years. I've taught team taught sophomore English for 12 years now at Vernon Hills High School. There are 4 levels of classes that are accessible to our students in sophomore year. There's the instructional English through special education, there's team taught, there's college prep, and there's honors. And every year by about January or so, I noticed that there are some students in my team taught class who I think they are ready. They are ready to move on. They do not need the 2 teacher support. And I'll encourage them sometimes at the semester or definitely for the following school year. Hey, you're ready. You do not need the 2 teacher support anymore. I really recommend that you take junior American English at the college prep level. And that might even give you access as a senior to take AP literature, because I think you're on your way. You're finding your strengths. You've got this. And I cannot tell you that Jocelyn is not the only one who will look at me and say, no, Miss Christian, I'm comfortable where I am. These are the people I know because they're in my algebra class too. We've had all of our classes together since 6th grade. We've always been together. This is where I'm comfortable. I don't think I'm ready. And I have pushed back with those students time and time again. And so many times Jocelyn and her colleagues will say, no, I'm going to stay in team taught junior year American Lit. And then what happens is then that student will then also perhaps decide not to then become a diagonal mover their senior year. I want to tell you another story. A few years ago, when we started the AP SEM class that's open to juniors and seniors, we decided it was really important to encourage that AP SEM class to be open to everybody because College Board says that we should not be eliminating who is taking AP classes. So there was a big push in the sophomore World Lit classes when it was enrollment time, recruitment time for junior year to say, hey, we think you belong in this AP SEM course too. And we had about 6 students say, okay, I'm game. I'll buy it. Let's do it. And what happened was by about January the following year, when they were in that AP SEM class, half of them, maybe 3 or 4 of them dropped out. And they told their counselors that they did not feel like they belonged in those classes. They had never been with those other kids ever before. It was the first time being there and they didn't belong. They felt in some ways looked down upon, but a lot of it was internally. They did not feel that sense of belonging. And so they left that AP level course and then they did not pursue another AP level English course their senior year. So I just want us to connect this idea of belonging with pushing students towards those upper level pathways of success. And yes, this is going to be a long-term process and exploration, but I want us to not divorce belonging from that specific commitment too, because they're so related. And so I just wanted to bring in student perspective so we can imagine from their points of view.
And can I tell one more story?
Please.
So I teach team taught juniors and I'm going to say this student's name is Marissa. So I taught Marissa in my team taught junior class. It's a homogeneous class. And then I had the pleasure of having Marissa again this year in my senior elective, which is a heterogeneous class. And the 3rd day of class, I was just standing nearby and I'm listening to Marissa talk amongst her classmates because they were talking about whatever they were supposed to be talking about, right? And I hear Marissa go, I never knew that we could have conversations like this in class and that people could hear me and understand my perspective. And it sort of broke my heart that it took her to her senior year for her to be in this heterogeneous environment with kids who had been in AP before and college prep before and to be engaged in this high level academic discussion. And for Marissa to feel like she was playing a pivotal role in that academic discussion. So just one more student voice story to bring in about how heterogeneous classrooms can increase student belonging in a really meaningful, powerful way.
And can I just add, I think this concept of detracking, it almost serves as, in my mind, kind of the culmination in addressing all of those other DEI goals, those larger DEI goals that we have put forth. I think that's kind of the point you're trying to make. The detracking fosters every one of those points that you had committed to, those 4 points we're committing to. And so, I think a lot of us as board members and a lot of people are going to have a hard time wrapping their head around how one facilitates all the others. But I think in a perfect world, and I'm hoping we're getting closer and closer to a perfect world every day, but in a perfect world, that's exactly what it does. It groups these heterogeneous groupings of students who can grow and learn and support one another. And, when they go out into the world, that will be the microcosm of the world, right? That is their microcosm of the world. So it completely makes sense. So as a starting off point, for a conversation that I hope we're going to continue to have and develop these ideas, I can't wait to hear more. I think, and I'm not speaking for any other board member, but I think, where the concerns still lie are the implementation, the buy-in, the scaling up potentially from something smaller and giving people giving every stakeholder time to really wrap their brain around these broader DEI goals for our district to understand how the detracking model supports those.
I just might jump into, I had stayed quiet early on because I wasn't an active part of the Commitment 3 group. I wasn't part of that, that group. But when you think about the overarching goals of a program that would include students of varying skill levels and engaged in a skills-based, inquiry-based, project-based environment at an entry-level course, say an entry-level social studies skills course, where there is the opportunity to develop earned honors credit, that I think that's what this group is talking about. How do we open doors through a very thoughtfully designed pilot of a course that all students have to take, and all students begin to develop the skills that they'll need to gain access to upper level courses. The other thing that I think should be noted is I think it's a really good thing, Cara, that you said you are surprised to hear the word tracking. And that means that most of our students feel the opportunities that we've tried to develop over the years to promote access to upper level classes, specifically maybe a single AP course that they choose to take over the course of their high school career. That's been a long-term goal that we've talked about together as a group. And we've intentionally added classes like AP Seminar and other courses that really are not, you know, the goal of our additional AP courses has not been to provide another AP course for every kid that takes nothing but AP courses. It's been to introduce courses that promote that access to kids who weren't choosing the current AP offerings that we had. So I do think that moving forward into the future, exploring these ways of promoting access, removing barriers in really intentional ways that we have done. I think that's what this group is talking about, and exploring that option for a community of learners who are of varying degrees of ability and who learn to grow together and based on their assets and strengths. I think there's room to explore those opportunities. And so I just wanted to add from my perspective and kind of historical view as well that that has been a goal. And obviously our data shows that all the things that we've tried are not working for specific subsets of students. And so we have to continue to explore what will work for those students, but not in a way that seems overwhelming or inaccessible to our teachers, for sure.
So for me, I think I came in with a higher level of anxiety before this conversation. So thank you to everyone for, I think you've brought my comfort level up a significant level. What also struck me is as we are looking at improving access, it's improving access for all students. But the largest benefit for the I don't know the right word, the teacher taught, not the
Driving
co-team.
students who might need more support.
Yeah, that right now is seems like more slated towards students of color, so they will see hopefully the biggest benefit there, but it actually helps all students get more access to their full potential. So I think as you talk through this, it's important to continue making that known that it's not just for a particular racial group, it's really for all students to get to their max potential.
I'll just make a couple of comments. I've been listening to everyone here, and what strikes me is, yes, and in many ways, if we continue to do more of what we've done and still not see the results, we have to at some point in time consider other options. But what strikes me as interesting is the term tracking, and the work around this kind of thing and the quote detracking is not new. It's been around a long time. It's been around maybe at the elementary level a bit longer than the high school level, but it's been around a while. And the idea of detracking, I think it has, for me, it's sort of a sense of I don't know, to be able to actually acknowledge that we have these homogeneous classes still, and that even though this momentum, whether it's IDEA or whatever, that's pushing towards these heterogeneous environments, giving kids, these students, the access to the learning, the environments that they really should have. It strikes me as interesting that we're now recognizing that, no, we're not there yet, and we have more work to do. And I think we're now at that point where some of these things get harder to do and more difficult to do. And yes, maybe take a little more time and a little more resource, and maybe take a while to roll out. But I'm just impressed that I wish everyone, we've been at so many meetings, board meetings and committee meetings. I wish so many people could be sitting in that audience and hearing the valuable conversation and the deep questions and whatnot. I'm just, even though it's taking some time, I think it's time well spent and really, interesting conversation. So we appreciate the time that you folks bring to us this evening, and all the hard work that goes into this, and looking forward to more. Anyone else have any wrap up?
I have 1,000 more questions.
Yeah, me too.
The question is this the time? Do we just keep?
Well, I think out of respect of other things on our agenda, I think that one thing that would be helpful is, like you said, you came in with higher anxiety, it's lower now. What questions remain? And to think of a way to gather those so our team can follow up. And I'm sure some will be easy to answer and some are going to be, we don't know, but let's make sure that it's more clear that that's still a question to be investigated. The idea of continuing to investigate options for this is at very early, but again, because it is politically charged, we wanted to make sure we were talking with you openly about it right away.
Right.
And so this is us saying, here's what we're learning. We think it might have some influence to help us in our system. We'd like to investigate it further.
So do we present those questions very quickly now, or do we send them to you or one of the committee members? Because I can ask 3 questions really fast.
But you have 1,000.
I have 1,000.
I know.
There's 3 right now that are, I already parsed them out. I got an idea. Okay.
It's up to you, Jim, in terms of the meeting time.
If you got 3 quick ones, we can at least hear them. Maybe we won't have the complete answer, but that will be, sure, we can.
Okay, the community is going to wonder about that honors credit. So what do we do about that? Now, we addressed it a little bit tonight. So
The honors credit?
the honors credit, like I want my kid to have a 5-point GPA by the time they get out of here. So how are we addressing that? This is not an insignificant cost. Just the training alone, based on your figures, is going to be substantial. If our role as board members are to do everything that we can to ensure that our kids are getting the best education possible, then I would say that we can afford it. But that brings me to another question, part of affording it. What data do we have that shows us that class size needs to be addressed? Like, how do we know? Because you mentioned that, and I'm thinking FTE now.
Mhm.
So, and as a teacher, it's nice to have smaller classrooms. Bigger classrooms are harder, especially when you have to do differentiated instruction. So there's got to be a sweet spot. I agree that there's got to be a sweet spot, but again, FTE. So what does that impact look like? And then my last question is, I think that's it. I can be done.
Okay.
And I think
One quick one. And you said y'all so quickly that maybe there's a chance you're from the South.
Crucial information here.
So
Levity's always good.
I'm a military brat who was
Ah,
born in Tennessee and then ended up in Indiana where my dad retired. So I'm from Indianapolis. So it does. My dad would say it's my Tennessee roots, but my parents are from Wisconsin and I sometimes sound like I'm from Wisconsin. So I don't know what to tell you.
Especially.
It was a conundrum for me.
I know, right? But I can also say y'all and it's like, fine. So, that.
We'll allow it.
Thank you.
And I think in terms of other questions that either, V8 moment driving home, or you think about them, send them to me. I sit on the C3 committee, or any of the other commitments in terms of feedback that you'd like us to consider or questions that you want us to be prepared because again, this is a committee conversation. We will be bringing updated reports and potentially including some of the answers to these questions to the summary of this that we'll be delivering at the April board meeting.
I have 10 to 20 questions right here that I could fire off just as part of like the, turning the wheels a little bit if anyone wants to hear them. I can just start. Teachers who have been in the game for a long time have seen this trend come and go several times. Why is it different this time? I've seen it, and I didn't teach as long as you guys have been teaching. I've seen it come and go twice, actually. What does the level of commitment with regard to professional development and investment from the district look like? Differentiation by one teacher in a classroom of 25, let's just say, is a struggle. How can the district support teachers? So how can the district support teachers with that differentiation when it comes to class size? How much is this all going to cost in reality with regard to full-time positions? Which of our local peer districts are contemplating this model? What is the success rate of this model? And I know that's a very broad question because by what way are we measuring that success? How does this affect teacher morale? How does this affect teacher morale right now in a post-COVID world? In the inner city school model, what were the tools for assessment to calculate success? What were the long-term indicators of success? Did these same students go on to be successful at four-year universities? Did they earn degrees? Will these heterogeneous groupings be the norm for math and literacy classes only? It sounds like no. Or for transition and college prep levels only? Again, sounds like not necessarily. For other academic areas as well. And basically, my overarching question, though, was, is there a way to do this incrementally? So those are just, and one more significant question, I think, that really kind of addresses some of that teacher buy-in, but does it take away autonomy from our teachers, or does it provide them with more?
That's a really good question.
My only questions were on metrics because it takes certain number of metrics to go from point A to first point of change, but then sustaining it is potentially a different metric. So what are those categories? I'd be interested in seeing those.
I am all in for elevating for everybody. I see this as elevating for everybody, and I'm all in for that. I look forward to see how we talk about it. I'm over the being mystified about detracking. I don't like the word. I think
we need
public
we need
relations.
to-
I think it needs a different terminology than detract.
A rebrand.
Yes, I think that the community needs to hear something different than that.
And
I
I
like
think it's really
expanded access. I
reasonable,
like that, but if
Well,
we're going to go down this road,
we-
we need to start with the right verbiage so that we do get that community buy-in that you said was so important.
And we have to be very careful that our equity work never gets perceived as being subtractive, because that is not what it is. It's additive. Remember, what we're doing is we're talking about all of our students reaching higher levels of achievement. So this is not taking away from any population of students. What this is about, our work in any level of our system, is about all of our students being happier, healthier, and higher performing. So this is an additive to our system. It's an ultimate good. We have a value. We have a value of expanding access and getting all of our students to higher levels of success. And one potential strategy for raising that may be some types of heterogeneous groupings, right? But we're really just at the front end of saying, how could our actions align to our values? And again, challenge ourselves to not say it's got to be a technical solution that is very narrow in approach, but rather a part of a larger cultural transformation of the way D128 schools are organized to support student learning. And so that's, very clear that you are challenging us to take and to be very thoughtful about the way we expand access, the way we raise learning and achievement for all of our students, and to do so in a way that is supported through the system, both with budget, with PD, with teacher ability to operate in this new system. So this is very helpful for us as we begin to continue to move this work forward.
And I'd just love to say, as a teacher and as an equity coordinator, I'm so grateful that we have a board of education who cares deeply about our students and our teachers and wants to make sure that all can be successful. And you all brought up all of the questions that we've been pondering. And so I am so grateful for the questions that you've asked, because it's going to push us to make sure that we're really doing this thoughtfully, so that we can meet the needs of our teachers and our students.
A wise superintendent, previous superintendent, once told me, talking about this very issue, he wanted to raise the floor and remove the ceiling so that all students can reach their ultimate potential. So I'll just leave it at that. And again, as Dr. Herman was saying, if you think of a question on the way home or something, jot her an email and we'll start gathering those, and might not have the answers to all of them, but they're good things to think about.
Thank you for all the work.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you. Okay. Nothing more on that. Next, e-learning plan.
Yes, so just to provide some context, this is really a renewal. It's a procedural step in our e-learning plan that, according to Illinois legislation, allows us to use an e-learning day in lieu of 5 emergency days over the course of a calendar year. So we don't have to extend our year with an emergency day when any emergency, whether it is a snow day or some other emergency occurs. And so we were one of the earliest districts to follow the new legislation and to get our plan in during the 2019-20 school year. The process for doing this is to write a plan that meets the criteria of the legislation, to have you as a board approve it, and to present it to our regional office of education for their endorsement of our plan and their permission from the state as the state authority to allow us to use an e-learning day. So our plan is expiring this year, and the new plan covers the next 3-year period. It is organized by the legislation. The headings are the things that we need to answer to in the legislation and provide information as to how we will address those requirements in our plan. And so the e-learning plan simply provides information about how we're going to take student attendance and provide access to all students. All of our students have Chromebooks, so we've addressed that. We provide Wi-Fi to students who can't access it. And we have a plan that we've been using now quite well through COVID, in which teachers post their assignments in Google Classroom. Students are aware of where to look for their assignments in Google Classroom, and they complete what is akin to a 5-hour school day of work on an e-learning day. We have added that since we've learned from our earlier plan that teachers can provide synchronous learning if they choose to, that we've added that as an option on an e-learning day. Teachers may choose to, during their class period, offer synchronous learning. It's not a requirement on this single emergency day, because teachers may have similar, similar emergencies that might prevent them from providing synchronous learning. So this really does not change much what had been our standard plan. It just describes how we will use those days should the need arise. Does
Question.
anyone have any?
A quick question and a comment. Actually, a facetious question. It's, who would have thought back in fall of 19 that we would be developing, and we too were one of those early adopters, a plan that would become so, even if it's not a fully fleshed out for an entire year of remote learning, that it would have been so valuable to us at that point in time. So that's, I don't need an answer to that, but the question I have is there any action that we will need to take this coming
Yes,
board meeting?
we will need to formally, the board will need to formally adopt this plan at the board meeting. We have shared the information about the renewal of the plan with our union president. After tonight's meeting, if there are no changes, I will also contact him to let him know that this is what we hope to adopt. And once you adopt, then it's not in place until we send it to the ROE and they formally approve it from the state.
Do we need to add, sorry, do we
No,
need
go
to
ahead.
add language if a teacher does choose to have a synchronous class, that how that information is disseminated to something easy?
Yeah, in the Google Classroom is how we've, yeah, I could, you mean add another, because it says previously that all the information will be shared through Google Classroom, but I understand you're suggesting it should be more explicit there to say that if they choose to,
This meeting,
right,
they won't sign in during their time.
right. And that's,
I know that has happened to several kids, that they didn't know the teacher was, they didn't read it well or something to affect the teacher. There has to be something disseminated that synchronous learning
Is
yeah,
what
it would,
not happening.
yeah, it would be part of what they put in their Google Classroom for the expectations for that day. But I can certainly add a line that makes that more explicit, where it says if they, the teachers may offer synchronous learning and will inform students through Google Classroom of that decision. Would that work? Doesn't hurt to be redundant, for sure.
I don't want to put it on the teachers, more of that students have to know that they have to look. That's not my question. You know, I mean, I think I've just heard a couple that students didn't realize that teachers were
Yeah.
doing it. And I'm sure it's because they didn't look well.
Right, but they know that, so students know they have to look for their assignment in Google Classroom. So if teachers are including that offer of synchronous learning during the period, it will show up in that Google Classroom where students are being instructed to look for that day's work. So I think that will work. And if it doesn't,
I'm sure.
right. There's not a, you know, I think it would become more complicated if there was another way for students to
no,
discover synchronous learning. So it should be part of the seamless process of where they're looking to check for that class's learning assignment for that day.
Okay.
Any other things that you might like?
Do you have the document in front of you?
Yep,
Under collective bargaining negotiations and notice? there's
got
the
that
highlighted-
dot highlighted. We were not sure that you would suggest changes that might delay this for a bit longer. So I'm assuming that we have the time now. If we move this from today's committee meeting, we could post a public hearing at the April meeting and have you adopted in April. I wasn't sure if you might want us to do anything else where it might be delayed until the May meeting. So that's why I didn't include a date in there. But I will now update that one phrase and I will include the April board meeting date and we will get it on the board agenda for adoption.
Yeah, because this does require an adoption, a public
A public hearing prior
to that adoption at that meeting.
Yes.
Then I have one more question about
Yeah.
the last sentence. These communications will occur at least 30 days prior to utilizing an e-learning day. How do we, like, what happens if we have to use an e-learning day 5 days into the school year?
Well, once you adopt it, we'll communicate these expectations with our teachers as a result of the adoption. This has been shared, the plan has been shared. And they understand
So we
the
could do it-
protocols are existing protocols. So we would, you know, once it's adopted, I'll send a message to the staff that this is being adopted for the 22-23
year.
school year. That because we've experienced and had professional learning on these protocols.
Right.
That we will be able to use that this emergency day process from day one of the 22-23 school year.
Because our current one's still in the.
Yes. Yeah. So this
Right.
doesn't change any of the major protocols from our current plan.
Okay.
So we'll just let them know we're going to keep it going and could use it starting day one.
I think that was probably wording that was more important and suggested by the regional office on the first go around.
Yes.
So that
Right.
people were well aware.
Yeah.
This e-learning plan
Yeah.
that's new and different was fully communicated.
And sometimes when you're asking, someone to approve something, it's easier to organize what you're submitting by the requirements that they're looking for. So that's why I left all of those headings there in the
Great.
same way, so that they would see that we had met the requirements of the legislation. Make it easier for the approval to go quickly as it did the first time we submitted it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, other questions, comments? All right, let's move on. Review of board policies. Might I suggest that we table this for,
Sure.
just because of the,
can
we
do
have
that.
plenty more things to do. It's already.
And it was 86 pages.
We have-
It was really long.
Yeah, the one thing was there was a lot of updates that were done in February of 2022. So we have read through some of that. But I can definitely do that at the next meeting and highlight some of the other ones.
Yeah, yeah. if you-
Can I ask a favor of that, Brian? And I don't know if this is even possible, but while I was reading through them and kind of just trying to figure out what was old and what was new, is there any way you can separate out the ones that were updated in February of 22 and just leave the ones that are in need of additional updating?
Yeah, I just scrolled through and
I know
So it's not that they're in need of additional updating. They just haven't been so I could pull the ones out that are from older than February 2022 and then put that in the next packet.
do you mind?
I know.
That
I
would
can
make
do
it
that.
really easy to review it. Thank you.
I can do that.
Thanks.
Yeah, because if we're looking through a bunch of policies and we just looked through them.
I
last
kept
month,
saying
yeah.
to myself, exactly, this looks awfully familiar. And then I, of course,
Yeah, there were a lot of updates
And-
on the February 2022 from the legislation from last summer.
Okay.
Okay, more to
Thank
come
you.
on that next month.
No problem.
good idea, Jim.
Personnel items, we just have a list of folks here. Any comments or questions on any of these? Are pretty typical. We see a lot of certified rehires.
Mhm.
Okay, which we anticipated last month, so. Educational tours, we got a couple. State competition, I always like when those words are put in there.
Go dance teams.
Yeah,
Yeah. Any questions about either of those two?
Not about those in particular, but in general. I just got to get to my notes real quick. Yeah, it says the district is not the provider of the trip to the UDA overnight camp experience at Wheaton College occurring on or around June 7 through 10, undertaken by Casey Dugan. Who is it provided by?
So that's the statement that we have made that distinction in all of our ed tours, especially since COVID and some of the concerns that emerged over who was responsible for any lost investment in trips. And so we're distinguishing that we are approving the opportunity for students to attend, but it is the tour provider or the camp provider that is that the parents have a relationship with that tour provider or with the camp provider in terms of the cost of the trip to students.
Because we're actually transporting the students by bus to these places, are we not?
Yes.
So-
It's simply an alert to further clarify that financial obligation that parents are entering into with anyone that is providing the tour is a relationship between the tour participants and that organization. So there is some mingling of responsibility in terms of transportation, but that transportation we also provide on field trips. That is not the cost of that experience to those students. That transportation that we provide, they wouldn't lose any investment in that transportation.
Okay.
That
It just
makes sense.
seems-
Yeah.
It just seems odd
It-
there. Like if we're sending a group of students to compete someplace, like, then we're definitely providing that trip, like, because we're if we send a football team downstate.
Yeah,
we're
this is
providing
not
that
like,
trip.
this is more of an organized competition by that junior,
By that organization.
yeah, by that organization.
So they're
we're-
providing the experience. We're just.
We're
gonna
providing the
provide-
it's not like an
transportation, and we're not charging the students for that.
So it doesn't occur across the board. It only occurs for things like this.
yes, it would not, you would not see that on a athletic competition, state competition that we're taking students to, or right, or
So the baseball team goes to spring break in Phoenix.
And
That's
they
going to
do
be
sign
again
that.
another,
yeah, they do sign that,
Right,
but the
okay.
baseball team goes to the state competition, then they do not.
right, thank you.
Any other questions on those? Okay. Graduation ceremonies.
So Libertyville and Vernon Hills, their graduation ceremonies are coming up. I know it's hard to believe already, but they are Thursday, May 26th. And so typically we split up our board members to help hand out diplomas. So 3 at one and 4 at the other. And again, Libertyville High School will be at the Sears Center, and Vernon Hills. Actually, it's not the Sears Center. Sorry.
No.
What is it
Did
called?
they rename it?
Now, the Now Center. Now Center. Yeah, Now Arena.
Now the Now Center.
Yeah. And then Vernon Hills will be at the high school. So we kind of need to determine who is going where so that I can submit that to our school so they know. So
program.
Yeah,
Right.
this is the best role
Yeah,
for
this
the
is
board
fun.
members to take. It's so much, it's
so I don't know if anyone had any thoughts on that
We
or
could flip flop potentially. I know last year I attended along with Sonal and Lisa. Was there a
we were
fourth?
at Vernon Hills.
We were at Vernon Hills, but I would love to see a Libertyville graduation this year.
And if at all possible, I'd also like to go because this is the last year that I have a friend who's got a kid that I could pass their
Alright.
diploma to.
I unfortunately won't be in town.
Okay, so no gym. So we're gonna go 3 and 3 then.
Minor detail, and my daughter's getting married, but
Oh, that's.
I guess I got my priorities straight.
Of course, that's a
What is the
long way away.
difference, Tom?
from the
Is-
Sears
so they're
Center
both
versus
on the
Vernon Hills.
27th?
They're both at
Both
the
same
same time too, really.
So you
So
have to pay.
Wait, Vernon Hills is
At Vernon Hills.
Yeah.
And Libertyville is
Yeah.
Sears.
Maybe we can also get a show.
They're both great. They're both.
Casey, any preference?
Did you miss this part?
No, I know this part by heart. You know what? I've done Libertyville all since I've been on the board, so I would like to do Vernon Hills this year. Lisa probably wants to do that,
Yeah, I had her listed at Vernon Hills.
so I don't care.
Well, I think the idea of making sure when Lisa's son graduates
Yeah.
that she's there. So she might want to do Libertyville this year if we are going to try and flip flop.
I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
Her son is not graduating this year.
No, that's why I was saying
Next year.
this year she might want to do
My
Libertyville.
son's graduating here next year, so I will be here next year.
Right. That's, I guess I was just trying to make
Yeah.
sure that if we wanted to make sure
That's fine.
parents
I
of
can do
seniors.
Vernon Hills.
So now Libertyville. All right,
All right.
Lisa, Casey, and Cara at Vernon Hills, right? Don, Kara, and Sanal at Libertyville. So I'll get the information to Nora and to Kelly DeBruler, and they'll probably send you information on everything. Thank you.
So the only other question is who's going to accept the graduates? And Lisa, you said Lisa was going to be at
Vernon Hills.
Vernon Hills. Who's going to do that at
We can talk about that.
Libertyville?
Yeah.
With somebody. Okay, future agenda items. Any
Sure.
Governmental agreement with Vernon Hills.
Yeah, so these are kind of tied in a little bit together. So I wanted to bring your attention that we're going to bring next month, hopefully. So Vernon Hills Park District has expanded their swimming program and has approached us. We have some intergovernmental agreements with Vernon Hills already for Deer Path Parks for use of tennis courts, cross country. We have an agreement with them for the use of our stadium at Vernon Hills. And so they approached us about, we also use their Sullivan Center for some of our Special Olympics after school programs. So they approached us about using the swimming pool, which we are agreeable. So we are working on that intergovernmental agreement with them. So at the same time, we had discussions with Cats Aquatics. They have an agreement with us to utilize both pools. And so they will primarily be using Libertyville High School pool. And Vernon Hills Park District will be utilizing the Vernon Hills pool. There's also a little bit of a name change with Cats Aquatics in that they formally are becoming Rise Aquatics Club. And what that change is that there is Cats Aquatics, local Libertyville practice here. We'll do everything at Libertyville High School. But when they go to either state competitions or national competitions, they are teaming up with a team down in Willowbrook, and it allows them to expand for relays and for other things. So they formally their rise that the kids from Willowbrook will never come up and practice. We'll never go down there and practice, but their focus will be really on practicing here. So I'm going to be working on updating all of our agreements with Vernon Hills Park District, working with our attorneys on how we want to structure all of that, because there are a lot of different facilities, types of facilities. So, you know, I've been working well with Jeff over at Vernon Hills Park District. And so they've been a great team partner. So that's kind of the quick update, but I wanted to give you a heads up on future agenda items so that you're prepared. And again, hoping to have that in the May, but.
Can I toss one more
Oh, yeah.
intergovernmental agreement concept? And I've heard about this and I've been doing some reading about this. I understand there's a new requirement for intergovernmental agreements between high school and center districts for data sharing.
That is
So-
in the works. Thank
so
you for bringing that
That
up.
might be a
Yes.
future agenda item as well.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any other? Okay, let's call the program and personnel meeting adjourned.
Second.
Do we want a, yeah.
I don't think there's a vote.
Do we want a 5-minute bio break and then we'll
Please.
come back for the
Yeah.
facilities and finance? Thank you.
Order the Facilities and Finance Committee meeting. We've already done the Pledge of Allegiance. Public comment. Anyone present for public comment? Any comment? Mary? Okay. All right. Review of March committee minutes. Anything?
You'll
Any
notice
comments?
there are no minutes there, but they will be. We'll have to get those to you at a future time. So
Okay. All righty. Capital projects update for the summer.
This one, there really is no further update on this one.
Okay. Upcoming bids and contracts, the D128 transition pathways.
Yeah, so now that we have the lease in hand with the transition pathways program, we have to build out the space. And so they've been working for months on design and putting that together. We're going to need to pay for that project. That project is not in my fiscal 22 budget. Why? I don't know. We weren't totally sure of the timing. Would it happen mostly over the summer, but we really need to start construction on that this spring. And so, we're still working on price. It probably will be in the range, I would guess, in the range of 1.5 million-ish to build out that space totally. It's a pretty detailed gut, and then putting everything else in place for that program for decades to come. So in order to do that, our legal authority to spend money is limited by our budget. And so as I've updated you in the past, we've got some things that are trending exactly on budget, a few things trending under budget. So would we come under budget by enough to offset that cost? Maybe, but it's not worth the risk for me. And so at this point, what I would recommend, and I'll bring this back forward to you more into a future meeting, is a budget amendment for our fiscal year 22. And all I'm saying is where we're just going to do is just add a little bit of money to the capital projects fund, essentially transfer money from O&M to capital projects. Probably $0.5 to $1 million just for what we would spend for this fiscal year, which is done June 30th. So there wouldn't be much there probably, but we probably will have something there. And I just want to make sure there's enough there to not cause us a problem that, let's say everything did come in exactly at budget and we spent this, then we would overspend our budget. And that's not something that we're allowed to do. You know what I mean? So that will be coming. I don't even have a really fleshed out, like it'll be similar to other projects like the field house and stuff where we've had a pretty fleshed out. Here's the trade costs, here's the design costs, here's the owner costs, furniture, equipment, that kind of stuff. We're still working on all that stuff, but that will come shortly.
And we'll see that before we see the amendment for the budget.
You might see it at the same time. I don't know, because the amendment has to follow the same budget adoption as a normal budget. So you have to.
It has to be the amount.
Post it for 30 days. You have to have a hearing, you have to go through the whole thing. So we may have the final adoption of the budget amendment may not be till June, but it just kind of wraps everything up for the fiscal year. So
this isn't anything we'll be voting on at the regular board meeting.
not this month, no.
Any questions?
No.
Okay. Moving on to, looks like we have some things to dispose of, some obsolete equipment.
Yep, athletics is cleaning house. So there's some things of more than diminutive value and just the volume of jerseys. The jerseys and uniforms they're getting rid of. We want to make sure you guys were aware of that. So that information is in there. Again, the reason why we include this is our board policy says that if we dispose of personal property that is more than diminutive value, you have to approve that.
Okay, so that.
And we use it for accounting purposes. So we take it off the books, even though I'm sure this stuff is fully depreciated, but still it removes it from our capital asset listing.
Okay. And wherever possible, we do have a tradition of donating things when we can, just for the public's knowledge.
Mhm.
All right, and that will be voted on at the regular board meeting. Future agenda items.
Yeah. There will be a lot of things on future agenda items. There would have been a lot more tonight, but circumstances prevented such tonight. But we'll have a budget amendment. That's the budget amendment I mentioned, only related to the transition program. No other reason. We're going to keep everything the same as it is. Another one is our towel contract. We'll talk more about that, but that is a constant frustration, but that'll be at a future meeting. Especially those who have been around for a little while. It keeps coming up. There will be other ones. And so just because of inability to get stuff for tonight, we'll probably have more stuff for the actual April board meeting that are probably more discussion items than I would normally want to have here, but I couldn't get it for tonight. So we'll probably have more discussion items for you at F&F. It may not be everything that I'm just about to list, but it could be a number of these things. We'll see how much we can get done. One is the budget transfers that I mentioned in previous one. We got to do those transfers to get everything lined up for the end of the fiscal year. One of those will probably require a public hearing that we have to do by the end of the fiscal year. So it's kind of like a fiscal year wrap up cleanup. Related to that is ESSER 3 grant. So we're finalizing our ESSER 3 written plan. Part of the filing for the grant to get that money, it's about $500,000, is the board has to approve it, as there has to be a public hearing for it. So you'll see the plan at a future meeting, and then we'll talk about scheduling a hearing for that, probably at the May meeting, something like that. And then we'll have to post that on our website and everything and get feedback from stakeholders. The conversation about fully deferring our taxes, so that will come at a future one. Along the similar lines with that, the fund balance policy that we've talked briefly about. Also, that's still coming is the capital projects, like the prioritization, that kind of a process. We're still fleshing that out. And then finally, at the next one, I'd hope to give you a really good update on our food service. I'd love to give you an update now, but it's not on our agenda, and I want to be faithful to our public agenda. Food service, we went to RFP for that, and we've had a tour. So I want to kind of give you all some information based on that, because we'll be ready. We might be ready to make a decision on that pretty quickly for next year. So
One question on the ESSER grant. What's the kind of filing date by which we have to submit the paperwork?
I don't know that there is one, but those who have not done it yet, everyone's just kind of trying to get it done by the end of this school year.
Okay.
So I will check to see if there is one, but really you can use it. It dates back to the beginning of the pandemic. You can use this money for any expenditures you've incurred since the beginning of the pandemic. And then you have another 2 years beyond whenever you file for it to actually use the money. So it's a multi-year grant that you can utilize. But we're firmly within the timeline. It's not like we're going to run out of time between now and the end of the fiscal year on anything like that. Just to kind of pencil that in.
And that plan, they have some not restrictions, some requirements on using some of that money for learning loss recovery.
Yep, we'll have all that information in the
That will all
plan
be
for
in-
you.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of stuff for future agenda. Sounds exciting. Anyone else? Anything? All right. This might be a record, but we're adjourning Facilities and Finance Committee meeting 8:20.